name is Simone, and I never expected my marriage to end on a frozen sidewalk outside Emory University Hospital. My husband told me to take the bus home 3 days after I had a C-section because he was too busy closing a deal to pick me up. He said we had to sacrifice for the future of our family. But 10 minutes later, as I stood shivering with my newborn son in a car seat, I watched my husband drive past me in his Mercedes G-Wagon. He was not alone. His mother was in the passenger seat, and his sister was in the back, laughing with a glass of champagne in her hand. They did not see the woman they called a burden standing on the curb. They did not know that the broke housewife they mocked was actually the secret owner of the venture capital firm they were driving to impress. By the time they ordered dessert, I would own the restaurant. By the time the check came, they would be homeless. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lives in 1 hour, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who you are. The wind in Atlanta cuts differently in January, especially when you are standing on the pavement with a surgical incision that is still healing. I adjusted the blanket over my son Malik, trying to shield him from the exhaust fumes of the passing cars. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I had just hung up with Darnell. His voice had been frantic and filled with that fake urgency he used whenever he was lying. He told me he was in a high-stakes meeting with investors. He said the company was on the brink of a breakthrough and he could not leave. He told me to save money. He said Uber was a luxury we could not afford right now. He told me to take the number 81 bus and that he would make it up to me. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the man I married was sacrificing for us. Then I saw the car. It was unmistakable. The matte black G-Wagon I had bought him 2 years ago under the guise of an anonymous angel investor because his credit score was too low to lease a Honda. It rolled slowly out of the VIP parking lot of the hospital. The windows were tinted, but the sun hit the glass just right. I saw Darnell driving. He was not stressed. He was beaming. Next to him was my mother-in-law Beatrice, wearing that ridiculous oversized hat she only wore when she wanted to feel superior to someone. In the back seat was his sister Ebony and her husband Brad. Brad was pouring something into a flute glass. They looked like royalty. They looked like a family celebrating a victory. And I was just the help that had delivered the air and could now be discarded. I watched the taillights of the car fade into the traffic on Clifton Road. I did not cry. Tears are for people who have options. I had a plan. I hoisted the car seat up. The pain in my abdomen was a sharp, hot knife twisting with every step, but I welcomed it. It kept me focused. I walked to the bus stop. The shelter was crowded and smelled of old rain and stale tobacco. When the number 81 bus hissed to a halt in front of me, the driver did not lower the ramp. I had to lift the stroller and the baby carrier up the high steps by myself. A man in the front row watched me struggle. He did not help. He just stared at my chest and smiled a toothless grin. I paid the fare with the crumpled bills I had in my pocket. The bus was packed. There were no seats. I stood in the aisle clutching the metal pole with one hand and balancing the car seat on my hip with the other. The bus lurched forward and I nearly fell. The driver shouted back at me to fold the stroller or get off. I bit my tongue until I tasted copper. This was the reality Darnell thought I deserved. This was the life Beatrice said I was suited for because I came from nothing. The ride took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of stops and starts. 45 minutes of inhaling the scent of unwashed bodies and diesel fuel while imagining my husband sipping vintage wine. When I finally got off at our stop, my legs were trembling. The walk to our house was uphill. It was a beautiful house in a gated community, a house that Darnell told everyone he bought with his tech startup money. In reality, I paid the mortgage through a shell company in Delaware. I reached the front porch breathless and sweating despite the cold. I reached for the keypad on the smart lock. I punched in my code. The light flashed red. Denied. I tried again. Red. I pulled out my phone and checked my messages. There was a text from Darnell sent 20 minutes ago. It said Mom is coming to stay for a few weeks to help with the baby, so I changed the house code to make it easier for her to remember. It is Ebony's birthday. Use the back door. The front porch is being resurfaced. I looked down at the pristine limestone of the front porch. It was not being resurfaced. He just did not want me walking through the front door like I owned the place. He wanted me to know my place. I walked around the side of the house through the mud, dragging the stroller behind me. The back door was the entrance for the housekeeper. I punched in the date of Ebony's birthday. The light turned green. The kitchen was warm, but it smelled wrong. It did not smell like a home waiting for a new baby. It smelled like a nightclub. There were 3 empty bottles of wine on the marble island. I picked one up. Chateau Petrus, $5,000 a bottle. Darnell had told me we could not afford a $60 Uber ride, but he had just opened $15,000 worth of wine before dinner. I walked further into the room. The trash can was overflowing. On top of the pile was a crumpled receipt from Saks Fifth Avenue. I smoothed it out. A pair of Jimmy Choo boots for Ebony. A new Gucci handbag for Beatrice. Total cost was $12,000. The date on the receipt was today. While I was in the recovery room asking for an extra blanket, they were shopping. I moved to the living room. The expensive throw pillows were tossed on the floor. On the coffee table under a stack of Architectural Digest magazines, I saw a thick envelope. It was unopened. Darnell never opened mail that looked like bad news. I ripped it open. It was a foreclosure notice from the bank. The mortgage had not been paid in 4 months. The money I had transferred to Darnell's account specifically for the house payments was gone. He had stolen it. He had stolen the roof over his son's head to buy boots for his sister. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from a hidden app I kept on my phone, a secure alert from my Black Card account. I had given Darnell a supplementary card years ago for emergencies only. The notification read, "Authorization approved, $3,500. The Capitol Grill. They were not just eating dinner. They were feasting. They were celebrating their theft. I looked at my son sleeping peacefully in his carrier. He had a father who would let him freeze at a bus stop to buy champagne for a grandmother who hated him. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a safety being taken off a weapon. I was done being Simone the quiet wife. I was done being the supportive partner who hid her brilliance so her insecure husband could feel like a king. It was time for the ghost to come out. I picked up Malik and walked out the back door. I crossed the lawn to the guest house next door where Dr. Evans lived. He was a retired surgeon and the only person in this neighborhood who knew the truth about me. He opened the door and saw my face. He did not ask questions. He just took the baby carrier from my hands. "Go," he said gently. "I have him. Do what you need to do." I walked back to my empty house. I went upstairs to the master bedroom. I walked into the ensuite bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the shower, making the water as hot as I could stand. I stripped off the cheap sweatpants and the nursing top Darnell preferred me to wear. I stepped into the steam. I scrubbed the smell of the bus off my skin. I scrubbed the smell of the hospital away. I washed away the wife who begged for scraps of affection. I swallowed 2 prescription painkillers to dull the physical agony of my incision. I needed to walk straight. I needed to walk tall. I stepped out and dried off. I stood before the full-length mirror. I pressed my hand against the glass in a specific pattern. The mirror clicked and swung open, revealing a wall safe. I scanned my retina. The heavy steel door hissed open. Inside was not jewelry. Inside were stacks of hard drives, legal documents, and a single black velvet box. I opened the box. Inside lay my titanium American Express Centurion card and a USB drive containing the encryption keys to every shell company I owned. I dressed slowly. I did not put on the mom clothes. I put on a tailored black Givenchy suit that I had hidden in the back of the closet. I put on my Louboutins. The red soles flashed like a warning signal. I pulled my hair back into a severe, sleek bun. I applied my makeup with the precision of a war paint. When I looked in the mirror again, Simone, the victim, was gone. The woman staring back was the financial assassin who had brokered billion-dollar mergers for the ruthless elite of Atlanta. I called a taxi. I did not call an Uber. I called a private car service I used for my high-end clients. "Where to?" ma'am, the driver asked as I slid into the leather back seat. "The Capitol Grill in Buckhead," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And hurry. My husband is expecting a surprise." The drive took 20 minutes. I spent every second of it on my phone executing commands. I accessed the banking portal for Darnell's company. I froze the assets. I accessed the lease agreement for the office space he rented. I initiated the eviction protocol. I forwarded the foreclosure notice to the email addresses of every board member of the Phoenix Capital Group, the investors he was meeting tomorrow. I was not just going to ruin his dinner. I was going to erase his existence. The car pulled up to the restaurant. The valet rushed to open my door. I stepped out. The air was still cold, but I did not feel it anymore. I walked up to the entrance. The hostess looked at me, her eyes scanning my suit and the diamonds in my ears. She knew money when she saw it. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked. "No," I said, handing her $100 bill. "But my husband does. Darnell Jenkins. He is at the table with the loud family and the cheap ambition." She led me through the dining room. I saw them before they saw me. They were in a semi-private booth. The table was covered in seafood towers and steaks. Brad was standing up holding a glass of wine, making a toast. To Darnell, he shouted, slurring slightly, for keeping the women in line and the money in the bank. Darnell laughed. Beatrice laughed. Ebony clapped. I walked right up to the table and pulled out the empty chair next to Darnell. The laughter died instantly. Darnell choked on his wine. Beatrice dropped her fork. Brad froze with his glass in the air. Darnell looked at me, his eyes wide with shock and then quickly narrowing into anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed. "I told you to go home. You look ridiculous." I reached across the table, picked up his glass of Petrus, and took a slow sip. "I missed the bus," I said calmly, setting the glass down. "So I decided to buy the bus company. And while I was at it, I decided to buy this restaurant too. So who ordered the lobster? Because you are all about to choke on it." The taxi ride to Buckhead gave me 20 minutes to simmer in the reality of what I was about to do. I had instructed the driver to drop me off a block away from the Capitol Grill. I needed the walk. I needed the cold air to sharpen my senses. Underneath my oversized beige trench coat, I was armored in a bespoke black suit, but buttoned up, I looked like exactly what my husband accused me of being: a tired, overwhelmed mother who had just been discharged from the hospital. I had tied my hair back in a messy bun and wore no makeup. This was a test. I wanted to see the world exactly as Darnell saw it one last time before I forced them to see me. The streets of Buckhead were lined with luxury cars and people who walked with the specific confidence of generational wealth. I walked past the valet stand where a line of Porsches and Maseratis idled. My husband's matte black G-Wagon was parked right in front in the spot reserved for VIPs. Seeing it there gleaming under the streetlights sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. That car was registered to a holding company I managed. I paid the insurance. I paid for the gas. And yet he had driven it away from the hospital while I stood on the curb. I reached out and ran my finger along the hood of the car as I passed. It was cold steel, cold, hard, and expensive, just like the lesson I was about to teach him. I approached the heavy glass doors of the restaurant. The warm glow from inside spilled onto the sidewalk, illuminating the brass handles. I could see the hostess stand, the bustling dining room, the waiters moving like synchronized swimmers in their white jackets. It was a world of comfort and excess, a world my husband was currently enjoying on my dime. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air smelled of truffle oil, aged steak, and expensive perfume. It was a scent I knew well, usually from the other side of the table. But tonight, I was an intruder. Before I could even reach the hostess stand, a shadow blocked my path. It was the floor manager. He was a thin man with slicked back hair and a suit that was trying too hard to look Italian. His name tag read, Julian. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my worn sneakers and the hem of my sweatpants peeking out from under the trench coat. I had intentionally chosen comfortable shoes for the walk, knowing they would trigger exactly this kind of reaction. Julian did not see a customer. He saw a nuisance. He saw someone who had wandered in off the street, someone who would disturb the aesthetic of his dining room. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked. The tone was not helpful. It was a dismissal wrapped in a thin layer of customer service politeness. He did not smile. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his body angled to block my entry further into the restaurant. "I am here to join a party," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "The Jenkins party. They are in one of the private rooms." Julian let out a short, sharp breath that might have been a laugh. He looked over my shoulder as if expecting to see someone else. Someone who actually belonged here. When he realized I was alone, his expression hardened. "I'm afraid that is not possible," he said. "The Jenkins party is a VIP booking, and we have a strict dress code at the Capitol Grill." He gestured vaguely at my coat. "We do not allow athletic wear or unkempt attire in the main dining room. Perhaps you have the wrong establishment. There is a diner 3 blocks down that might be more accommodating." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I pushed it down. This was part of the dance. I looked him directly in the eyes. "My husband is inside," I said. "I have had a medical emergency and I need to speak with him. I am not leaving until I see Darnell Jenkins." Julian stepped closer, invading my personal space. His cologne was overpowering. "Miss, I am going to ask you to leave quietly," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "If you cause a scene, I will have security remove you. We have clients here who pay a premium for atmosphere. We cannot have people like you wandering around looking for handouts or causing domestic disturbances. Please, go. People like me." The phrase hung in the air between us. He did not know who I was. He did not know that 3 months ago I had dined here with the mayor of Atlanta to discuss municipal bond yields. He did not know that I had tipped the server $500 that night. All he saw was a black woman in a trench coat looking tired, and in his mind that equated to trash. I looked at the security guard standing by the door. He was already watching us, his hand hovering near his radio. Julian was enjoying this. He liked the power. He liked being the gatekeeper. He thought he was protecting the sanctuary of the elite from the rabble. He had no idea the rabble owned the building. I reached into my pocket. Julian tensed, perhaps thinking I was reaching for a weapon or a camera. Instead, I pulled out my phone. "I am going to make one phone call," I said. "You can call whoever you want outside," Julian sneered. "You are trespassing." I ignored him and dialed a number I had saved in my favorites. It rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Simone. Is everything all right? I haven't heard from you since the baby news." "Hello, Mr. Henderson," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Julian's face. "I am actually standing in the lobby of your flagship tenant, the Capitol Grill in Buckhead. I seem to be having a slight issue with the entry protocol." "What kind of issue?" Henderson asked. His tone shifted instantly from friendly to alert. Arthur Henderson owned half the commercial real estate in Buckhead. I had saved him from a $20 million tax liability last year. He owed me. "There is a manager here named Julian," I said. "He seems to be under the impression that my attire renders my money invalid. He is threatening to have security physically remove me. I just wanted to clarify with you if the terms of their lease agreement allow them to discriminate against the partners of your financial consultants. Because if so, I might need to review the renewal contract we drafted for next month." There was a silence on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of a chair scraping back. "Put him on," Henderson growled. I held the phone out to Julian. He looked at it like it was a loaded gun. "Who is this?" he asked, his arrogance wavering slightly. "It is your landlord," I said. "And my client." "Take the phone, Julian." Julian reached out with a trembling hand and took the device. He brought it to his ear. "Hello, this is Julian the floor mana." He stopped mid-sentence. His face went from flushed to an ashy shade of pale in less than a second. His eyes widened. He stood up straighter, almost saluting. "Yes, Mr. Henderson. I did not know." "No, sir. Of course not. I understand. It will not happen again. I am so sorry." "Yes, immediately." He handed the phone back to me with two hands like he was offering an offering to a deity. His hands were shaking. "Mr. Henderson would like to speak to you again, ma'am," he squeaked. I put the phone back to my ear. "He is taken care of," Simone Henderson said. "Enjoy your dinner. And send me photos of the baby." "Thank you, Arthur. I will." I hung up and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I looked at Julian. He was sweating now, beads of perspiration forming on his upper lip. The sneer was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. He knew that one word from me could end his career. "I am so terribly sorry, Mrs. Jenkins," he stammered. "If I had known—" "Please allow me to escort you personally. Can I take your coat?" "No," I said coldly. "I will keep the coat. Take me to the room." Julian nodded vigorously and gestured for me to follow him. We walked through the main dining room. The atmosphere had changed. Before I was an intruder. Now, with the manager bowing and scraping beside me, the diners looked at me with curiosity instead of disdain. I walked with my head held high, ignoring the whispers. I was not here for them. I was here for the table in the back. We approached the hallway leading to the private VIP suites. These rooms were soundproofed, designed for illicit deals and loud celebrations. But as we got closer to the door of the largest suite, the soundproofing failed to contain the raucous laughter coming from inside. It was a laughter I recognized. It was the sound of my husband holding court. It was the sound of my mother-in-law cackling at someone else's expense. Julian reached for the door handle, but I stopped him with a raised hand. "Leave," I said. "But ma'am, can I get you anything? A drink? An appetizer?" I looked at him one last time. "Get me a bucket of ice," I said. "I have a feeling things are about to get very heated in there." Julian nodded and scurried away, relieved to escape the blast radius. I stood alone in the hallway outside the mahogany double doors. I could hear them clearly now. They were making toasts. I heard the clink of crystal glasses. I heard Brad's booming voice. To Darnell came the shout. To the man of the hour. And then I heard my husband's voice. It was smooth, confident, the voice he used when he was selling a lie. "Thank you, everyone," Darnell said. "This deal with Phoenix Capital tomorrow is going to change everything. But honestly, the best part isn't the $5 million. The best part is that I am finally going to be the man this family deserves. No more dead weight holding me down. No more coming home to a woman who counts coupons and complains about the electric bill. I am finally free." My hand hovered over the door handle. Free. He thought he was free. He thought he had shed the burden of a nagging wife. He had no idea that the burden was the only thing keeping him afloat. He had no idea that the dead weight was the anchor that stopped him from drifting into the abyss. I took a deep breath. I gripped the cold brass handle. I did not just open the door, I threw it open. The heavy wood swung inward with a crash that silenced the room instantly. I stepped into the doorway. The scene before me was like a tableau of betrayal. The table was littered with seafood towers, empty wine bottles, and half-eaten steaks. Darnell was standing at the head of the table, glass raised. Beatrice was to his right, wearing the new scarf she had bought with my money. Ebony was to his left, wearing the boots she had stolen from my son's future. Brad was leaning back in his chair, a cigar in his hand. They all froze. 50 eyes turned to look at me. For a second there was absolute silence. Then Darnell lowered his glass. He squinted at me, taking in the trench coat, the messy hair, the sneakers. A look of pure disgust washed over his face. "Simone," he asked, his voice dripping with embarrassment. "What are you doing here? I thought I told you to take the bus." I stepped into the room, letting the door close softly behind me. The click of the latch sounded like the locking of a prison cell. I looked around the table, making eye contact with every single one of them. I let the silence stretch, let the tension build until it was suffocating. I looked at Darnell. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. "The bus was full, Darnell," I said. "So I decided to come collect the fare from you. And trust me, the price has just gone up." The silence in the private dining room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the laughter that had been echoing just seconds before. I stood in the doorway, my presence acting like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. My husband, Darnell, looked at me as if I were a ghost, or worse, a debt collector. His hand, which had been raised in a toast, slowly lowered to the table, the expensive crystal glass clicking against the china plate. The sound was sharp, like a bone snapping. He blinked rapidly, his eyes darting from my worn sneakers to the bewildered faces of his family, trying to calculate the damage to his reputation in real time. "Simone," he choked out, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat and tried to deepen his tone, attempting to summon the authority of the CEO he pretended to be. "Simone, you are embarrassing me. I told you I was in a meeting. This is a private business dinner. You need to leave. Now." I did not leave. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate step into the room. The carpet was thick and plush beneath my feet, a stark contrast to the hard, freezing concrete of the bus stop where I had stood an hour ago. I looked at the table. It was a grotesque display of gluttony. There was a tower of chilled seafood lobsters cracked open like red wounds, oysters glistening on crushed ice. There were bottles of wine that cost more than my father made in a month. And there were my family members dressed in clothes bought with credit cards I paid off, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. Beatrice, my mother-in-law, was the first to recover her voice. She adjusted the oversized hat on her head, the feathers trembling with her indignation. She looked at me with the same look she used on the housekeeping staff when they missed a spot of dust. "My God, Simone," she hissed. "Look at you. You look like you just crawled out of a gutter. Do you have no shame? We are celebrating the biggest moment of my son's life and you barge in here looking like that. Where is my grandson? Did you leave a newborn baby alone to come here and humiliate us?" I did not look at her. I kept my eyes locked on Darnell. "Malik is safe," I said, my voice calm, almost melodic. "He is with Dr. Evans. He is warm." Which is more than I can say for how he was when his father left him on the curb. Beatrice scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. Darnell is a busy man. He is building an empire. He cannot be expected to play chauffeur every time you decide you are tired. That is your job, Simone. To support him. To be the rock. Not to be the anchor dragging him down with your neediness." Then a chair scraped back against the floor. It was Brad, my brother-in-law, the man who had married into the family and immediately appointed himself the patriarch because of his skin color and his job at a mid-tier investment bank. He stood up slowly, unbuttoning his suit jacket with a practiced, arrogant smoothness. He walked around the table toward me, swirling his wine glass, a smirk playing on his thin lips. He looked at me the way a disappointed teacher looks at a slow student. "Simone. Simone. Simone." Brad sighed, shaking his head. He stopped a few feet away from me, invading my personal space, just enough to be intimidating, radiating the smell of expensive cologne and condescension. "Let's take a breath here, sweetheart. I know your hormones are probably all over the place right now. Postpartum is a real thing, and we get that. Women get emotional. They get irrational. It is biology. But you need to look at the optics here." He gestured around the room with his wine glass, pointing at the mahogany paneling, the gold-framed oil paintings, the chandeliers. "This is the big leagues, Simone. Darnell is about to step into a world that requires a certain level of sophistication, a certain caliber of partner. Tonight we are discussing strategy. We are discussing the future. This is men's business. It is not the place for domestic disputes or for you to come dragging your laundry list of complaints. I looked at Brad. I looked at his tie, which was crooked. I looked at his watch, a Rolex Submariner, that I knew was a fake because I knew exactly how much money he made, and he could not afford the real one. Men's business, I repeated flatly. Is that what you call spending $3,000 on dinner while your mortgage is in default? Brad's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. He let out a patronizing chuckle. See, this is exactly what I mean. You do not understand high finance, Simone. You see a bill. We see an investment in networking. You see debt. We see leverage. That is why Darnell is the CEO, and you are, well, you are the support staff. And right now the support staff is malfunctioning. You are damaging the brand. If you cannot look the part, and you clearly cannot, then the least you can do is stay out of the frame. Go home. Take a nap. Let the men handle the heavy lifting. I felt a cold fire burning in my chest. It was the specific rage of being lectured on finance by a man whose entire portfolio I could buy with the interest from one of my savings accounts. But I did not scream. The ghost does not scream. The ghost dismantles. I walked past Brad, ignoring him completely, and pulled out the empty chair next to Darnell. The heavy leather chair scraped loudly against the floor. I sat down. I picked up a linen napkin and unfolded it across my lap, covering the stain on my sweatpants where the bus seat had been wet. I am not going anywhere, I said, reaching for a piece of bread. Since I am paying for this dinner, I might as well eat. Darnell's face turned a deep blotchy red. The veins in his neck bulged. He leaned in close to me, his voice a low, dangerous growl. You are not paying for anything, he whispered. I am. I am the one with the meeting tomorrow. I am the one bringing in $5 million. You are nothing. You are a broke, desperate housewife who is jealous because I am finally succeeding without you. Jealous, I asked, tearing a piece of bread. Darnell, you have 3 maxed-out credit cards and a car note that is 60 days past due. The only reason your phone is still on is because I paid the bill this morning. Liar, Ebony screamed from across the table. She slammed her hand down, rattling the silverware. You are such a liar, Simone. Darnell told us everything. He told us how you spend all his money on baby clothes and nonsense. He told us how he has to hide cash just to keep the business running. You are a parasite. You are just trying to ruin his night because you can't stand that he is the star and you are nobody. Beatrice nodded vigorously, her eyes narrowing. It is true. I always knew you were not good enough for him. We welcomed you into this family, and this is how you repay us. By shaming my son in public. You are lucky Darnell is a good Christian man. Any other man would have divorced you long ago and taken that baby to be raised by someone with class. Brad chuckled again, returning to his seat. She is right, Simone. You are punching above your weight class here. Darnell is about to be a multi-millionaire. Do you really think he is going to stay with a woman who looks like she shops at the thrift store? He needs a trophy, not a charity case. If you had any dignity, you would sign the papers and walk away before he has to embarrass you in court. I chewed the bread slowly, swallowing it before I spoke. I looked at Darnell. I saw the fear behind his anger. I saw the desperation. He knew I was telling the truth about the bills, but he believed his own lie about the $5 million. He truly believed that tomorrow Phoenix Capital would save him. He had no idea he was sitting next to Phoenix Capital. Darnell, I said softly. Look at me. He refused to meet my eyes. He stared at his plate, his hand gripping his wine glass so hard his knuckles were white. Look at me, I commanded, putting a sharp edge of authority in my voice that made him flinch. He turned his head slowly. His eyes were bloodshot. Tomorrow, I said, when you walk into that boardroom, remember this moment. Remember that I gave you a chance to leave this table and come home to your son. I am giving you one last chance, Darnell. Put down the glass, get up, and come home with me. If you stay here, if you choose them, and their lies over your reality, there is no going back. Darnell looked at his mother. Beatrice stared back at him, her face hard and demanding. She nodded at him, a silent order, to stand his ground. He looked at Brad, who gave him a smug thumbs up. He looked at Ebony, who was sneering at me. Then he looked at me, and he made his choice. "Who do you think you are?" Darnell shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "You are giving me a chance. I am the prize here. I am the CEO. I am the one who is going to be rich. You are nothing. I should have left you at the hospital. I should have left you on the street where you belong." He stood up abruptly. His hand shot out. He grabbed the goblet of water in front of him. It was filled with ice and lemon. "Wake up, Simone," he screamed, and he threw it. The water hit me full in the face. The shock of the cold was instant and breathtaking. Ice cubes bounced off my forehead and clattered onto the table. Lemon slices stuck to my cheek. The water soaked my hair, dripped down my nose, and saturated the collar of my trench coat. For a second, the room was frozen. Even Brad looked shocked. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but her eyes were gleaming with satisfaction. Water dripped from my eyelashes. I could taste the lemon on my lips. I did not wipe it away. I did not flinch. I sat perfectly still, letting the water ruin the last piece of dignity they thought I had. I slowly reached up and took a lemon slice off my cheek. I placed it gently on the side of my bread plate. I looked up at Darnell. He was panting, his chest heaving, his hands still extended, holding the empty glass. He looked wild, manic. I stood up. I moved slowly, deliberately. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the water from my chin, but I left my face wet. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to remember exactly what he had done. I leaned in close to him, so close I could smell the fear sweating out of his pores beneath the expensive cologne. I spoke in a whisper that was louder than any scream. "You made a mistake, Darnell. A very expensive mistake." I pointed a manicured finger at the puddle of water soaking into the white tablecloth. "You see that water?" I asked. He stared at it, trembling. "That glass of water," I said, my voice dropping to 0 degrees. "That glass of water just cost you more than your entire company is worth." I turned my back on him. I did not look at Beatrice. I did not look at Brad. I walked to the door. "Enjoy the lobster," I called out without turning around. "It will be the last meal you ever eat as a free man." I walked out of the room, leaving the door wide open behind me, letting the noise of the common dining room flood into their private sanctuary. The game was over. The execution had begun. The headlights of the Mercedes G-Wagon swept across the living room wall like searchlights from a prison guard tower. I sat in the dark on the armchair in the corner, the only light coming from the street lamps outside filtering through the sheer curtains. I had been waiting for 2 hours. My suit was gone, replaced by the soft cotton robe Darnell hated because he said it made me look like a maid. I needed him to see the maid. I needed him to see the victim one last time. I heard the heavy thud of the car door slamming, followed by the sound of Darnell kicking the front door. He fumbled with the keypad for a solid minute, cursing loudly, his fingers too uncoordinated from the wine and the rage to hit the numbers correctly. Finally, the lock buzzed and the door swung open. He stumbled into the foyer, bringing with him the smell of stale cigar smoke, expensive cologne, and the sour reek of too much Merlot. He did not turn on the lights. He just stood there, breathing heavily, his silhouette swaying slightly against the backdrop of the open door. "Where are you?" he bellowed into the darkness. "I know you are in here, Simone. Do not hide from me. You were brave enough at the restaurant. Be brave now." I reached out and clicked on the small table lamp beside me. The sudden pool of yellow light made him flinch. He shielded his eyes, squinting at me with a mixture of hatred and confusion. His tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck like a noose he had forgotten to tighten. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the gold chain I had bought him for our first anniversary. "There you are," he sneered, kicking the door shut behind him, "sitting there like a queen. You ruined my night, Simone. You know that. You ruined the most important celebration of my career. Brad is furious. Mom is crying, and it is all your fault." I stayed silent. I watched him stumble into the living room, knocking over a vase of white lilies on the entry table. The vase shattered, water pooling on the hardwood floor, But he did not even look down. He walked over to the sidebar and poured himself a drink from the crystal decanter, ignoring the fact that he was already drunk enough to fail a sobriety test by just standing still. "You are quiet now," he said, taking a gulp of whiskey. "You had plenty to say when you were embarrassing me in front of the staff at the Capitol Grill. But now you are quiet. Good. Stay quiet, because I am done listening to you." He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. They were crumpled and stained with a drop of red wine. He walked over to me and threw them. The papers fluttered through the air, separating as they fell, landing on my lap and the floor around my feet. I picked up the top page. In bold black letters at the top it read, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." I scanned the document. It was crude. It was clearly downloaded from a legal template website and filled in with a shaky hand, probably Brad's hand judging by the spelling errors. "Sign them," Darnell said, leaning against the fireplace mantel, trying to look casual but nearly slipping on the hearth. "I want you out. Tonight. Tomorrow morning when I sign that deal with Phoenix Capital. I want to be a single man. I want to be free of your dead weight." I looked up at him. "You want a divorce?" I asked softly. "Darnell, we have a 3-day-old son." Darnell laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. "Correction," he said. "I have a son. You were just the vessel. Look at paragraph 4. I looked down at the paper again. Paragraph 4 was highlighted in yellow marker. Sole legal and physical custody to be awarded to the father Darnell Jenkins. The mother Simone Jenkins waives all visitation rights due to financial instability and mental incompetence. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He did not just want to leave me. He wanted to erase me from my child's life. "You want full custody?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, masking the volcano of rage erupting in my chest. "Darnell, you have never changed a diaper. You do not even know the name of his pediatrician. You left us on the curb at the hospital. Why do you want custody?" Darnell smirked. He took another sip of whiskey, swirling the amber liquid in the glass. "It is about branding, Simone," he said, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "A young, successful Black CEO raising a son on his own. That is a story. That is compelling. Investors love a single dad. It shows resilience. It shows dedication. Plus, think of the social media engagement. Hashtag dad life. It is going to be gold." My hands tightened on the paper, crinkling the edges. He wanted my son for a hashtag. He wanted my flesh and blood as a prop for his Instagram feed. "And what about me?" I asked. "Where do I go?" Darnell shrugged. "That is not my problem. You can go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of before I saved you. You can go stay with that old doctor next door since you like him so much. But you are leaving this house. And you are leaving empty-handed." He pointed a finger at me, his eyes narrowing. "And do not think about fighting me on this, Simone. If you do not sign those papers right now, I am cutting you off. I will cancel the credit cards. I will stop the allowance. I will drain the joint account. You will not be able to buy a pack of gum, let alone a lawyer. You will be on the street begging for change. Is that what you want?" The irony was so thick I could taste it. He was threatening to cut off the money that I gave him. He was threatening to drain an account that was only funded by my monthly transfers. He was standing in a house I owned, wearing a suit I bought, drinking whiskey I paid for, telling me he was going to make me poor. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to laugh in his face. But I could not laugh. Not yet. I had to play the part. I had to be the scared, defeated wife one last time. I let my shoulders slump. I let my lower lip tremble. I looked down at the floor, feigning submission. "Please, Darnell," I whispered. "Do not do this. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. You know I gave up my career to support you." Darnell smiled. It was a cruel, satisfied smile. He enjoyed seeing me beg. It fed the empty hole inside him where his self-esteem should have been. That was your choice, he said, and it was a bad investment. Now sign the papers, or I call the police and tell them you are trespassing. I took a deep breath. I reached into the pocket of my robe. Okay, I said, my voice shaking. You win. I will sign. But what, he snapped. But I cannot sign this version, I said, holding up his crumpled template. It is messy. It is not notarized. It will not hold up in court if you want it to be fast. And you want it to be fast, right? You want to be single for the meeting tomorrow. Darnell nodded vigorously. Exactly. I do not want any loose ends. I pulled a folded document out of my robe pocket. I had printed it an hour ago in my home office while he was still racking up a bar tab at the restaurant. It was sleek, professional, and printed on heavy bond paper. I prepared this, I said, handing it to him. It is a separation agreement. It gives you everything you asked for: the house, the car, the custody. It grants you full ownership of Jenkins Enterprises and all associated assets. It says, I leave with nothing. I was going to give it to you next week, hoping we could work it out. But if you want it now, here it is. Darnell snatched the papers from my hand. His eyes lit up as he scanned the first page. He saw the words he wanted to see. Full ownership. Sole custody. Waiver of alimony. He did not read the fine print. He did not read the definitions section on page 2, where asset was defined as any holding with positive equity and liability was defined as any debt, lien, or outstanding judgment. He did not read the clause on page 4, the one I had titled Risk Transfer Protocol, which stated that the signatory agrees to assume personal liability for all corporate debts, known and unknown, including those currently under investigation by federal authorities. This looks better, Darnell mumbled, flipping through the pages too fast to read anything but the headers. Much more professional. See, you can be useful when you want to be. He walked over to the desk in the corner of the room. He slammed the papers down and patted his pockets, looking for a pen. I walked over and handed him a Mont Blanc pen. It was the pen I had used to sign the deal that bought the building his office was in. Here, I said. Use this. It writes beautifully. Darnell took the pen without saying thank you. He bent over the desk, the lamplight illuminating the back of his neck. So this gives me everything, he asked, pausing with the pen hovering over the signature line. You are walking away. You are not going to ask for a cent. I am walking away, Darnell, I said. I do not want your money. I just want peace. He chuckled. Smart girl. You finally realized you cannot win against a man like me. He pressed the pen to the paper. The sound of the nib scratching against the high-quality paper was loud in the quiet room. He signed his name with a flourish. Darnell Marcus Jenkins. He signed the second copy. He signed the third. He stood up and handed the pen back to me, a look of triumph on his face. Done, he said. You are officially history. Now pack your bags. I want you gone before sunrise. He picked up his copy of the agreement and waved it in the air like a trophy. I am going to bed, he announced. I need my beauty sleep. Tomorrow I become a millionaire. And you become a memory. He walked past me, bumping my shoulder intentionally. He headed toward the stairs, whistling a tune. He did not ask where Malik was. He did not check on his son. He had the piece of paper that said he owned the boy, and that was all that mattered to him. I waited until I heard his bedroom door slam shut upstairs. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of his shoes hitting the floor. I looked down at the document in my hand. The ink was still wet. He had signed it. He had legally absolved me of every single financial disaster he had created. He had personally guaranteed the debts that were about to crush him. He thought he had signed a victory treaty. In reality, he had just signed his own death warrant. I walked over to the fireplace. I picked up the crumpled divorce papers he had thrown at me earlier. I struck a match and held it to the corner of the page. I watched the yellow flame curl the paper, turning his demands into ash. I dropped the burning paper into the grate and watched it turn to black dust. I looked at the separation agreement again. I folded it neatly and placed it back in my pocket. "You want to be a single man, Darnell," I whispered to the empty room. "You got your wish, but you are not going to be a rich single man. You are going to be the poorest man in Atlanta." I turned off the lamp. The room plunged back into darkness. I did not pack a bag. I did not need to. My clothes, my real clothes, were already waiting for me at the Ritz-Carlton. My car, my real car, was waiting in the garage of the guest house. I walked to the back door, the same door I had entered earlier like a thief. I punched in the code. The lock clicked open. I stepped out into the night. The air was crisp and clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the oxygen of freedom. I walked across the lawn to Dr. Evans' house. I saw the light on in the living room. He was waiting for me. Malik was waiting for me. I was leaving my husband. I was leaving the house I had paid for. I was leaving the life I had constructed to protect his fragile ego. But I was taking the only thing that mattered. I was taking the truth. And tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. sharp, I was going to deliver that truth to him in a way he would never forget. I pulled out my phone and sent one text message to my lawyer. "The Eagle has landed. The asset transfer is signed. Execute Protocol 0 at opening bell." I put the phone away. "Good night, Darnell," I said, looking back at the dark window of the master bedroom. "Sleep tight. Because when you wake up, the nightmare begins." The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the home office with a blinding intensity that matched the pounding headache behind Darnell's eyes. He sat in his leather executive chair, nursing a mug of black coffee, staring at the empty driveway where my car used to be. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was wearing the same wrinkled shirt from the night before. But despite the hangover, there was a smugness to his posture. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully evicted the problem from his life. He had no idea that the problem was currently sitting 300 yards away in the guest house wearing noise-canceling headphones, listening to every breath he took. I adjusted the volume on my receiver. The audio quality from the bug I had planted inside the surge protector under his desk was crystal clear. I could hear the hum of his computer fan. I could hear him slurping his coffee. And then I heard the heavy front door open and the confident, aggressive footsteps of the man who pulled his strings. Brad walked into the office without knocking. He looked fresh, rested, and predatory. He was wearing a navy blue suit that cost more than Darnell's car, and he carried a leather briefcase that I knew contained nothing but shredder fodder. "Morning sunshine." Brad said, his voice booming through my headphones. "You look like hell. I assume the celebration went late." Darnell groaned and shielded his eyes. "Keep it down, Brad. My head is splitting." "But yeah, it is done. She is gone. I watched her walk out the back door last night. Signed the papers and everything." Brad whistled a low, appreciative sound. "She actually signed, no fight, no demanding, half the equity." Darnell laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "She tried to act tough. Handed me her own version of the agreement. But I read it. It gives me everything. The house, the car, the company. She just wanted out. I think she knew she was beaten. She knew she couldn't compete with us." I watched on the monitor as Brad walked over to the desk. He did not look relieved. He looked suspicious. He picked up the signed agreement that Darnell had left sitting out. He flipped through it, his eyes scanning the pages rapidly. "It gives you the company?" Brad asked sharply. "Specifically the company—" "Yeah," Darnell said, leaning back. "Jenkins Enterprises. Sole ownership." "Why do you look so worried? You should be happy. We kept the gold mine." Brad tossed the papers back onto the desk. He walked over to the window and looked out his back to Darnell. "I am worried because people like Simone do not just walk away, Darnell. She is quiet, but she is not stupid. You said she made comments at dinner. About liens, about interest rates, about compliance." Darnell waved a hand dismissively. "She was just bluffing. Trying to scare me. She is a virtual assistant, Brad. She schedules dentist appointments for a living. She doesn't know anything about corporate finance." Brad turned around. His face was hard. The mask of the supportive brother-in-law dropped, revealing the cold, calculating criminal underneath. You better hope she doesn't know Darnell. Because if she knows what we are actually doing, and if she decides to open her mouth, we are not looking at a divorce settlement. We are looking at federal prison. I leaned forward in my chair. This was it. I had suspected it for months, ever since I saw the irregular cash deposits in the company ledger that didn't match the service invoices. But I needed him to say it. I needed it on tape. Darnell sat up straight, the color draining from his face. What are you talking about? We are a tech startup. We are building a luxury rideshare app. Brad laughed. It was a cruel, mocking sound that echoed in the empty room. Oh, grow up, Darnell. Do you really think anyone is investing $5 million in an app that has 0 users and a crash rate of 80%? Do you really think Phoenix Capital is interested in your code? Darnell looked confused, like a child being told Santa Claus wasn't real. But the meeting, the investors, you said they loved the pitch. Brad walked over to the desk and leaned down, placing both hands on the mahogany surface looming over Darnell. There are no investors, Darnell. Phoenix Capital isn't a tech fund. It is a washing machine. And we are the laundromat. He lowered his voice, but the microphone picked up every syllable. My clients have a lot of cash. Cash that comes from pharmaceuticals. Cash that comes from imports that do not go through customs. They need a place to put that cash to make it look clean. That is what your company is. That is what it has always been. You are the face. The young, black, ambitious entrepreneur. It is the perfect cover. No one looks twice at a diversity startup failure. We pump the money in, we pay ourselves exorbitant consulting fees, the company goes bankrupt in 2 years, and the money comes out clean on the other side. Darnell was trembling now. The coffee mug rattled in his hand. You are using me to launder money. Brad, you said this was legitimate. You said you believed in me. Brad rolled his eyes. I believe in your ability to sign your name and look good in a suit. That is it. And until last night, that was enough. But now we have a problem. He pointed a finger at the door where I had exited the night before. Your wife. She started asking questions about the books. She mentioned the shell companies. If she goes to the IRS or if she goes to the SEC during the divorce proceedings, just to be petty, they will audit us. And if they audit us, Darnell, they will find the $3 million from the cartel that we just moved through the server maintenance account. Cartel, Darnell squeaked. Brad slammed his hand on the desk. Focus. The point is, she is a liability, a loose end. And now that she is out of the house, she is unpredictable. We cannot have her running around Atlanta with a grudge and a head full of numbers she shouldn't know. I watched Darnell slump in his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. He wasn't the master of his universe anymore. He was just a patsy. So what do we do? Darnell whispered. She already signed the papers. She is gone. Brad began to pace the room. I could hear the leather of his shoes creaking. We need to discredit her, Brad said. We need to make sure that if she ever talks, no one listens. We need to make her look like a scorned, unstable woman who lost her mind after the baby was born. He stopped pacing and looked at Darnell with a sinister grin. You said she was emotional, right? Crying erratic? Darnell nodded slowly. Yeah. She was weird last night. Quiet, then aggressive. Then she threw water at me. Or I threw water. It was messy. Brad snapped his fingers. Perfect. Postpartum psychosis. It is a real condition, very tragic. Women hallucinate. They become paranoid. They make up stories about their husbands being criminals. They become a danger to themselves and their children. My blood ran cold. I knew where this was going. I had seen Brad do it before to a secretary who threatened to sue him for harassment. He didn't just fire people, he destroyed their credibility. We need to get ahead of the narrative, Brad continued, his voice dripping with excitement. I have a friend, Dr. Eris over at Piedmont Hospital. He owes me a favor, a big one. What kind of favor? Darnell asked. The kind where he signs an involuntary psychiatric hold order if a concerned family member reports a threat, Brad said. He walked around the desk and put a hand on Darnell's shoulder. Here's the plan. You are going to file a police report today. You are going to say Simone threatened to harm the baby. You are going to say she was talking about hearing voices. We will get Dr. Aris to sign off on an emergency evaluation. We pick her up, we put her in a 72-hour hold. Once she is in the system stamped with a mental health red flag, anything she says about money laundering shell companies or fraud will sound like the ramblings of a crazy woman. Darnell looked up at him. You want to put her in a psych ward, Brad, that is? She is the mother of my son. Brad squeezed his shoulder hard. She is the only witness who can send us to jail for 20 years, Darnell. Do you want to raise your son from a visitation room in a federal penitentiary? Do you want to lose the house? The car. The reputation. Darnell shook his head frantically. No, I can't go to jail. I am a CEO. Then we do what is necessary, Brad said firmly. We neutralize the threat. We lock her up until the deal with Phoenix Capital closes tomorrow. By the time she gets out, the money will be moved, the company will be restructured, and she will be fighting for her sanity instead of her assets. She will never see that kid again. And you will be the hero who saved his son from a madwoman. I sat in the guest house, my hand hovering over the stop button on the recorder. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a cold, hard certainty. They weren't just thieves, they were monsters. They were willing to gaslight a new mother, willing to tear a baby from his mother's arms, willing to abuse the medical system just to cover their tracks. I looked at the digital waveform on my screen. It was a perfect recording. Every word, every threat, every admission of guilt. Brad thought he was playing chess. He thought he was 3 moves ahead. He didn't realize he had just knocked over his own king. I saved the file. I named it Evidence Exhibit A. I uploaded it to 3 separate cloud servers and emailed a copy to the FBI agent I had been coordinating with for 6 months. Darnell. Darnell, I whispered to the screen. You should have just taken the bus. I stood up and walked to the window of the guest house. I could see the 2 of them in the office window shaking hands. A pact of wolves. I checked my watch. It was 8:45 a.m. The meeting with Phoenix Capital was in 24 hours. But the meeting with reality was happening right now. I picked up my phone. I dialed a number. Hello, Agent Reynolds, I said. It is Simone. I have the confession. They just admitted to the laundering and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. Brad Miller is the architect. Darnell is the accomplice. I can have a team there in 20 minutes, Reynolds said. No, I said. Not yet. Let them come to the meeting tomorrow. I want to look them in the eye when the handcuffs go on. I want them to think they succeeded right up until the last second. Understood, Reynolds said. We will have units stationed at the Ritz-Carlton. Stay safe, Simone. I hung up. I looked back at the house one last time. Safe. I wasn't the one in danger. I was the danger. I turned off the monitor. I had a suit to buy. I had a boardroom to prepare. And I had a husband to bury. Not in the ground, but under a mountain of evidence so high he would never see the sun again. Get ready, Brad, I said aloud. You wanted to talk about crazy. I am about to show you exactly how crazy I can get. The recording light on my console blinked off. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. The heavy steel doors of the vault at Sterling & Chase Private Wealth Management did not open for just anyone. They required a retinal scan, a voice print match, and a net worth verification that would make most professional athletes weep. I stood before the scanner in the subterranean level of the bank building in downtown Atlanta. My eyes were dry, my hands were steady. I was no longer the woman in the sweatpants who had been thrown out of a restaurant. I was wearing a bespoke white suit that cost more than Darnell's car. My hair was pulled back in a severe, flawless bun. I looked like what I was, a predator in a concrete jungle. I leaned forward. The red laser scanned my left eye. The machine beeped a pleasant affirmative tone. The heavy tumblers of the door began to rotate. As the metal groaned and shifted, my mind drifted back 5 years. A brief flicker of memory. I was 25 years old. I was sitting in a coffee shop in Midtown, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, working on my laptop. I had just closed my first 8-figure deal selling a proprietary trading algorithm to a hedge fund in New York. I was ecstatic, I was rich, and I was lonely. Darnell had walked in. He was handsome, charming, and he bought me a latte. He asked what I did. I hesitated. I didn't want him to see the money. I wanted him to see me. So I lied. I told him I was a virtual assistant. I told him I organized calendars for busy people. He smiled and said that was sweet. He said he liked a woman with a simple, supportive job. He said he was going to be a big shot one day, and he would need someone to keep his life in order. I fell in love with the potential of us. I hid the shark to marry the goldfish. I thought if I made myself smaller, he would have room to grow. I was wrong. If you shrink yourself for a man, he doesn't grow. He just learns that you are small. The vault door swung open. The air inside was cool and smelled of old paper and ozone. Charles Sterling, the senior partner of the bank, was waiting for me. He was a man of 60 with silver hair and a suit that whispered old Southern money. He had managed the fortunes of senators and oil tycoons, but when he saw me walk in, he did not just stand. He bowed. It was a slight bow, a tilt of the head that signaled profound respect. He knew who I was. He knew that the quiet black woman who came in once a quarter was the most powerful client in his portfolio. "Good morning, Madame Simone," Charles said. His voice was hushed, reverent. "We were not expecting you in person today. Usually you prefer digital encryption. Is everything satisfactory?" "Everything is changing." "Charles," I said, walking past him to the single leather chair in the center of the room. I sat down and crossed my legs. "I need full access to the mainframe, and I need coffee, black, no sugar." Charles snapped his fingers and an assistant materialized from the shadows to fetch the coffee. He hurried over to the large mahogany desk and turned the monitor toward me. "Of course. The system is primed. Your biometrics have already unlocked the Tier 1 accounts." I looked at the screen. The numbers were white against a black background. They were beautiful. They were the only thing in my life that had never lied to me. Total liquidity: $45,200,000. Real estate holdings: $12 million. Venture capital positions: $18 million. Total net worth: $75 million. I traced the numbers with my eyes. Darnell thought I was destitute. He thought I was begging for grocery money. He had no idea that the allowance I gave him came from the interest of a single bond maturation I had forgotten I even owned. I was not just rich. I was the ghost. That was the name the Atlanta Financial District had given the anonymous investor who swooped in and bought distressed companies, stripped them of their bad management, and sold them for a profit. They whispered about the ghost at cocktail parties. Darnell idolized the ghost. He had a poster on his office wall that said, "Hustle until you are a ghost." If only he knew he had been sleeping next to her for 5 years. I took the coffee from the assistant. It was hot and bitter. It tasted like focus. "Charles," I said, "I want you to pull up the debt portfolio for a company called Jenkins Enterprises." Charles typed rapidly. "Jenkins Enterprises," he muttered. "Ah, yes. The rideshare startup, high risk, low performance. We hold the primary lien on their operating capital, and we service the secondary loans for their equipment. It is a toxic asset, Simone. I have been advising you to foreclose on this for months. Why do we still hold this paper?" "Because," I said, taking a sip of coffee, "it was a pet project. But the pet has turned rabid." I watched the file load on the screen. There it was. Darnell's entire life. Every loan he had taken out, every credit line he had maxed out. He thought he was borrowing from banks. He thought he was borrowing from private lenders. He didn't know that every single lender was a subsidiary of a holding company owned by me. I was the bank. I was the landlord. I was the creditor. I owned the chair he sat in. I owned the computer he used to plot against me. I owned the very air conditioning that cooled his office. Status of the loans I asked. Charles adjusted his glasses. Technically, he is in default on the Series A loan. He missed the payment 3 days ago. The grace period ends. Well, it ended at midnight last night. The equipment loans are also cross-collateralized. If one defaults, they all default. I nodded. And the personal guarantee? Charles scrolled down. Yes. The CEO, Darnell Jenkins, signed a personal guarantee for the entire debt load. It puts his personal assets, including his primary residence, and any future earnings as collateral. I smiled. It was the same smile I had worn when I bought a failing airline and turned it profitable in 6 months. It was the smile of execution. Darnell had signed that separation agreement last night. He had fought so hard to keep the company. He had fought so hard to keep the assets. He didn't read the clause that transferred the liability. He thought he was keeping a gold mine. He was actually hugging a landmine. Charles first said softly, "Execute the acceleration clause." Charles stopped typing. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. The acceleration clause, Simone, that demands immediate repayment of the full principal. All $5 million. Due today. If he cannot pay, we seize everything. The accounts, the office, the intellectual property. It is the nuclear option. I set my coffee cup down. The sound of the china hitting the saucer was loud in the quiet vault. He threatened to put me in a psychiatric ward, Charles. He conspired to frame me to take my son. He thinks I am weak. He thinks I am crazy. I want to show him exactly how sane I am. Charles swallowed hard. He saw the ice in my eyes. He saw the mother who had been pushed too far. He nodded slowly. Understood. Initiating acceleration protocols. We are sending the demand notice to his server now. We are freezing the operating accounts. We are locking the payroll. We are notifying the credit bureaus. I watched the progress bar on the screen. 0%, 50%, 100%. Sent. Somewhere in Buckhead, inside Darnell's office, a notification bell was ringing on his computer. He probably thought it was the email from Phoenix Capital. He probably thought it was the money coming in. He was about to open it and realize it was the end of his world. But I wasn't done. Charles, there is one more thing. Yes, Madame, the Phoenix Capital deal, the one he thinks he is signing tomorrow. Yes, I want you to reroute the meeting location. Reroute it to where? To here, I said, to the main conference room upstairs. I want him to walk into my house. I want him to come to me. Charles typed the command. Done. The location has been updated in his calendar invite. He will think it is a last-minute security change. Perfect, I said. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my suit. I felt lighter. The burden of the lie was gone. The burden of pretending to be less than I was had evaporated. Charles stood up with me. Is there anything else, Simone? Yes, I said, walking toward the heavy steel door. I paused and looked back at the screen at the $45 million that gave me the power to protect my son. Initiate Operation Winter, I said. Charles looked confused. Operation Winter, cut them off, I said. Cut off every source of heat. Freeze the personal accounts of Beatrice Jenkins. Freeze the secondary cards of Ebony Jenkins. Call in the car note on the G-Wagon. I want them to feel the cold. I want them to know what it feels like to stand on a curb with nothing. Charles nodded. Operation Winter is active. Good, I said. I walked out of the vault. The door slammed shut behind me with a heavy final thud. It was done. The money was weaponized. The trap was sprung. Darnell wanted to be a single man. He was about to find out that being single is very expensive when you are at war with your banker. I checked my watch. 20 hours until the meeting. 20 hours for him to panic. 20 hours for him to sweat. I walked to the elevator. I had a boardroom to prepare. I had a script to memorize. And I had a husband to destroy. The bus ride was over. I was driving the tank now. The view from the guest house window was like watching a silent film of a disaster. I sat in the leather armchair with a cup of chamomile tea, my son sleeping soundly in the bassinet beside me. Across the manicured lawn, the main house stood like a fortress that had been breached. I could see them through the large bay windows of the living room. Beatrice was pacing back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear, her other hand waving wildly in the air. Even from this distance, I could read the body language of a woman who was being told no for the first time in her life. Operation Winter was in full effect. The first phase was the credit freeze. I had instructed Charles to lock down every secondary card attached to the Jenkins Enterprises corporate account. Beatrice didn't know it yet, but the platinum card she carried in her purse, the one she used to fund her lifestyle of lunches and luxury, was now nothing more than a piece of black plastic. I watched as she pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at the screen. She tapped it furiously, then dialed again. I knew exactly who she was calling. She was calling the concierge line. She was calling the bank. She was probably screaming at some poor customer service representative about how she was Beatrice Jenkins and her credit was impeccable. But the computer on the other end didn't care about her last name. It only cared about the flag I had placed on the account. Code red. Suspected fraud. Do not authorize. Then came the darkness. I had timed it perfectly. The power bill for the main house was technically 6 months overdue. Darnell had been ignoring the notices, assuming the utility company wouldn't dare cut off a home in this zip code. He was wrong. I had simply stopped the autopay from the holding company that had been quietly covering his negligence for years. At exactly 11:00 a.m., the lights in the main house flickered and died. I saw Beatrice stop pacing. She looked up at the chandelier in the foyer. She flipped a light switch on the wall. Nothing. The massive smart TV in the living room went black. The hum of the central heating system, which fought the January chill, silenced. The security system panel by the front door stopped blinking. The house was dead. I took a sip of tea. It was warm. My guest house was on a separate grid powered by solar panels and a backup generator I had installed 2 years ago. My lights were on, my heat was running, my Wi-Fi was blazing fast. The contrast was poetic. The front door of the main house flew open. Beatrice stormed out onto the porch wrapped in a fur coat that she hadn't paid for. She looked wild. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes wide with panic and rage. She looked across the lawn and saw the lights glowing in the guest house. She saw me sitting by the window. The connection was instant. In her twisted mind, this wasn't a consequence of debt. This wasn't a result of not paying bills. This was me. This was Simone the witch, Simone the bad omen. She marched across the frozen grass, her high heels sinking into the dirt, ruining shoes that cost $800. She didn't care. She was fueled by the narcissist's greatest fuel, which is the need to blame someone else for their own failure. She reached the door of the guest house and began to pound on it with her fists. "Open this door," she screamed. "Open it right now. I know you are in there. I know you did this." I stood up slowly. I checked on Malik. He didn't stir. I walked to the door and unlocked it. I didn't open it all the way. I just cracked it enough to look her in the eye. Beatrice stood there panting, her breath forming white clouds in the cold air. She looked at the warmth radiating from behind me, and her face twisted into a snarl. "You did this," she hissed. "You cut the power. You hacked the bank. I tried to book a flight to Paris just now to get away from your negative energy, and my card was declined. Declined. Do you hear me?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "I hear you, Beatrice," I said calmly. "And I imagine the neighbors can hear you too." She pointed a manicured finger in my face. "Don't you play innocent with me. You did something to the accounts. Darnell told me you handle the bills. You forgot to pay them on purpose to embarrass us. You are trying to sabotage his big day, turn the power back on, fix the credit card." Now I looked at her finger, then back at her eyes. "I didn't do anything, Beatrice. I just stopped doing everything. There is a difference. I stopped paying the bills with my money. What you are experiencing right now is called reality. It is cold, isn't it? Beatrice let out a screech of frustration. She pushed against the door, trying to force her way inside. Let me in. It is freezing out here. I am going to wait in there until Darnell gets back, and you are going to fix this mess, or I will take that baby and… She didn't finish the sentence. She lunged. Her hand came up, aiming for my face. She wanted to slap me. She wanted to physically hurt me because she couldn't hurt me emotionally anymore. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I caught her wrist in midair. My grip was iron. Years of carrying the weight of this family had made me strong. I squeezed her wrist just hard enough to let her know that the power dynamic had shifted physically as well as financially. Do not touch me, I said, my voice low and dangerous, and never threaten my son again. Let go of me, she shrieked, struggling to pull her arm back. You are hurting me. Help, police. I released her, and she stumbled back off the porch, landing in the mud. You want the police? I asked. Good idea. I looked past her toward the driveway. Because they are already here. Blue lights flashed against the trees. A patrol car rolled silently up the long driveway, crunching over the gravel. It wasn't there for me. I had texted Chief Miller 10 minutes ago when I saw Beatrice storming across the lawn. I knew how she operated. I knew violence was her last resort when manipulation failed. Two officers stepped out of the car. I recognized the one on the driver's side. It was Sergeant Williams. I had donated the funds for the department's new K-9 unit last year. We had met at the charity gala. He knew me not as Darnell's wife, but as the woman who signed the checks. Beatrice scrambled up from the mud, wiping her hands on her fur coat. She ran toward the officers, waving her arms. Officers, thank God, arrest her. She assaulted me. She is squatting in my guest house. She cut the power to my home. She is dangerous. Sergeant Williams didn't look at Beatrice. He walked right past her, his hand resting on his belt, his eyes locked on me. He walked up the steps of the porch and removed his hat. Mrs. Jenkins, he said, his voice respectful and warm. Are you all right? We received a distress alert from your personal security app. I nodded, smoothing my sweater. I am fine, Sergeant. Thank you for coming so quickly. My mother-in-law is having a bit of a crisis. The power went out in the main house due to non-payment, and she seems to be confused about who is responsible. She attempted to force her way into my residence and became physical when I refused entry. Beatrice's jaw dropped. She looked from me to the officer, her eyes bulging. What? That is a lie. She grabbed me. She is the one who didn't pay the bills. Arrest her. Do you know who I am? My son is Darnell Jenkins. He is a CEO. Sergeant Williams turned to Beatrice slowly. His expression changed from warm to stone cold. He looked her up and down, taking in the mud on her coat and the hysteria in her eyes. Ma'am, step back, he ordered. I am stepping back, Beatrice yelled. But you need to listen to me. She is the criminal officer, I said softly. I have a restraining order pending, but until it is served, I just want to ensure the safety of my newborn. I don't want to press charges for the assault today. I just want her removed from my property. Beatrice gasped. Your property? This is my son's house. Actually, Sergeant Williams said, pulling a tablet from his vest. According to the deed registry we pulled up on the way over, this entire estate, including the guest house and the main residence, is titled to a blind trust managed by Mrs. Simone Jenkins. He turned the screen toward Beatrice. Mrs. Jenkins here is the legal owner. You are a guest. And right now, you are an unwelcome one. Beatrice stared at the screen. She couldn't read the legal jargon, but she understood the tone. She looked at me. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not the fear of being poor, but the fear of being powerless. She realized that the ground she was standing on, the roof over her head, the very air she was breathing, belonged to the woman she had called a parasite. I suggest you go back to the main house, ma'am, Sergeant Williams said, stepping between us. And stay there. If we have to come back out here for a domestic disturbance, you will be the one leaving in cuffs. Do I make myself clear? Beatrice opened her mouth to argue, but she closed it again. She looked at the gun on his hip. She looked at my calm face. She realized she had no allies here. She turned around and began to walk back toward the dark, cold main house. She walked slowly, her shoulders slumped, the expensive fur coat dragging in the mud. She looked like a deposed queen marching into exile. Sergeant Williams turned back to me. "We will have a unit patrol the perimeter tonight, Mrs. Jenkins, just to be safe." "Thank you, Sergeant," I said. "I appreciate it. How is the new K9 doing?" He smiled. "He is doing great. We named him Ghost, actually, because he is silent until it is too late." I smiled back. "A fitting name. Have a good day, Sergeant." He tipped his hat and walked back to the car. I watched them drive away. I watched Beatrice disappear into the black cavern of the main house. I stepped back inside and closed the door. I locked it. I went back to my chair and picked up my tea. It was still warm. The collapse had begun. The power was gone. The credit was gone. The dignity was gone. But this was just the physical collapse. The real destruction, the dismantling of their souls and their freedom, was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. I looked at my phone. A message from Darnell. "Why is the power out?" "Mom says you did something. Fix it before I get home, or I swear to God, Simone." I didn't reply. I simply blocked his number. He didn't need to talk to me. He needed to save his voice. He was going to need it to beg the judge for bail. I finished my tea. "Sleep tight, Beatrice," I whispered to the empty room. "Don't let the frostbite bite." The silence in the guest house was broken only by the hum of the backup generator and the soft breathing of my son. Across the lawn, the main house remained a dark, looming silhouette against the night sky, a monument to Darnell's financial incompetence. I watched the shadows moving behind the curtains. Beatrice was likely pacing in the dark, wrapped in her unpaid-for furs, cursing my name. But then a light appeared. It wasn't the electricity coming back on. It was the flashlight of a cell phone moving erratically from the living room to the front door. I sat still, waiting. I knew what was coming. Darnell had been spiraling for hours, his phone blowing up with notifications from the bank about the credit freeze and the power company about the disconnection. But 5 minutes ago, I had authorized Charles to send the email, the bait. The notification that would make Darnell believe he had been thrown a lifeline just before the anchor dragged him down. The front door of the main house opened. Darnell stepped out. He wasn't storming across the lawn like his mother had. He was running, but there was a bounce in his step. He held his phone up like a torch, illuminating his path through the frost-covered grass. He reached the guest house porch and knocked. It wasn't the aggressive pounding of a man demanding entry. It was a rhythmic, almost cheerful knock. I unlocked the door and opened it. Darnell stood there shivering in his dress shirt, but his face was flushed with adrenaline. He was grinning. It was that wide, manic grin of a gambler who had just bet his last dollar and convinced himself he saw the winning card. "Simone," he breathed, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He rubbed his hands together, blowing warm air into them. "God, it is freezing out there. The city grid is a mess. I just got off the phone with the mayor's office. They said a transformer blew. Can you believe that, a transformer? That is why the power is out." I watched him lie. It was fascinating, really. He lied with the same ease that other people breathed. He knew I knew the power was cut for non-payment. He knew I had told the police that the house was mine. But he was rewriting reality in real time because his ego could not survive the truth. I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms over my chest. "Is that so?" I asked. "And did the transformer also freeze your mother's credit cards?" Darnell laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. He waved his hand dismissively. "Bank error. Total glitch. The system went down when the power grid fluctuated. It is all connected, Simone. You worry too much, but listen, none of that matters. None of the small stuff matters anymore." He held up his phone, thrusting the screen toward my face. "Look at this. Just look at it." I glanced at the screen. It was the email I had drafted myself an hour ago, from Executive Office of Phoenix Capital. Subject: urgent meeting reschedule and venue change. Body: Mr. Jenkins, due to an unforeseen schedule opening, the chairman requests your presence at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Please note the venue has been moved to the Sterling and Chase Private Wealth Boardroom for added security. They moved it up, Simone Darnell shouted, doing a little fist pump. They want to close the deal early. Do you know what this means? It means they are eager. It means they are afraid I will take the deal to another investor. They want to lock me in. $5 million. By lunch tomorrow, we will be liquid. We will be rich. I looked at his face. He genuinely believed it. He interpreted the urgency of his executioner as the eagerness of a partner. That is great news, Darnell, I said flatly. He walked over to me, invading my personal space. For the first time in months, he looked at me with something resembling affection. But it wasn't love. It was utility. He needed me. He needed the loose end to be tied up tight so he could walk into that meeting looking like a stable family man. Look, Simone, he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I know things got heated earlier. Mom was upset. Brad was stressed. I was under a lot of pressure. I might have said some things about custody and lawyers that I didn't mean. You know how I get. I am passionate. Passionate, I repeated. You threatened to have me committed to a psych ward, Darnell. Brad outlined a plan to have me arrested. Darnell's eyes widened, feigning shock. No, no, no. You misunderstood. We were talking about protection. We were worried about you. You seemed so stressed. We just wanted to make sure you got help if you needed it. But seeing you now, you look great. You look calm. You look like the Simone I fell in love with. He reached out and touched my arm. I suppressed the urge to recoil. I need a favor, he said. A big one. But I am going to make it worth your while. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of favor? Darnell took a deep breath. I need you to be cool tomorrow. I need you to keep quiet about the divorce, just for 48 hours, until the money hits the account. If the investors think my personal life is messy, they might hesitate. I need them to see a united front, or at least a quiet front. He paused, gauging my reaction. When I didn't scream, he pressed on. And in return, I am going to take care of you. I am serious. I know I said you would leave with nothing, but I was just angry. When this check clears, I am going to write you a check. $5,000. Cash. Just for you. You can get an apartment. You can get some new clothes. $5,000, I said. You are valuing my silence at $5,000. The deal is worth $5 million. Darnell chuckled, shaking his head. It is business, babe. Don't be greedy. $5,000 is a lot of money for someone in your position. Think about it. You have no job. You have no prospects. $5,000 could start a whole new life for you. He stepped back, looking pleased with his generosity. And that is not all. I know transportation is an issue for you. I don't want the mother of my child riding the bus. It looks bad for the brand. So I found a car for you. A car, I asked. Yeah. One of my boys is selling a 2014 Toyota Corolla. It has a few dents and the AC doesn't work great, but the engine is solid. I will buy it for you. Cash. You can drive Malik to the park. It is a good, safe mom car. I stared at him. He was standing there wearing a suit I bought, waiting to inherit a company I funded, offering me a dented 10-year-old car as a consolation prize for stealing my life. The audacity was almost impressive. It was a level of narcissism that defied physics. He truly believed he was doing me a favor. A Corolla, I said slowly. That is very generous of you, Darnell, considering you drive a G-Wagon. He shrugged. The G-Wagon is a company asset, Simone. It is part of the image. You are not part of the image anymore. You are civilians. Civilians drive Corollas. It is appropriate. He checked his watch. So do we have a deal? You keep your mouth shut, you sign the final papers quietly next week, and you get the cash and the car. I looked down at the floor, hiding the fire in my eyes. I needed him to think I was broken. I needed him to walk into that boardroom feeling invincible. Okay, I whispered. Darnell clapped his hands together. Yes, I knew you were smart. I knew you would see reason. There is one condition, I added, looking up. Darnell's smile faltered slightly. What condition? I want to go to the meeting. He froze. What? Why no? Absolutely not. You are not stepping foot in that boardroom. Brad would kill me. I am not going to say anything, I promised. I won't speak. I won't cause a scene. I want to see it. I want to see you win, Darnell. I want to see you sign the paper that proves you were right and I was wrong. If you let me watch you succeed, I will sign whatever you want. I will take the Corolla. I will disappear. But I need to see it with my own eyes. Darnell studied my face. He was looking for a trap, but his ego was blinding him. He heard what he wanted to hear. He heard that I wanted to witness his glory. He heard that I finally accepted his superiority. You want to watch me win? He asked, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Yes, I said. I want to see the moment your life changes. He ran a hand through his hair, considering it. Well, it would be a nice touch. Having my wife there looking admiringly at me from the sidelines. It plays well with the family man angle. He nodded decisively. Okay, you can come. But there are rules. Rules. Rule number 1. You do not speak unless spoken to. Rule number 2. You dress appropriately. None of those sweatpants. But don't try to look fancy either. You are there to serve coffee if they ask. You are there to be invisible support. Wear something humble, black, simple, like a secretary. I nodded. Humble, black, simple. I can do that. Good, Darnell said. We leave at 8:00 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. And Simone? Yes. Don't embarrass me. This is the big leagues. These people smell fear. If you twitch, you stay in the car. I watched him walk to the door. He paused with his hand on the latch. You made the right choice, Simone. You are finally learning your place. The Corolla is going to be great for you. You will love it. He opened the door and stepped out into the night. I love you too, babe, he called out over his shoulder, his voice echoing across the frozen lawn. I closed the door and locked it. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was the most satisfying sound I had heard all day. I walked back to the bassinet and looked down at my son. Your father is going to buy me a Corolla, I whispered to him. I laughed softly. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a cold, sharp sound. He thinks I am going to watch him win. He thinks I am going to serve him coffee. I walked to the closet where my garment bag hung. Inside was the white suit I had worn to the bank. But behind it was something else. A black dress, simple, elegant, and deadly. It was the kind of dress you wore to a funeral, which was appropriate. Because tomorrow, Darnell wasn't going to a meeting. He was going to his own wake. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Charles. The target is acquired. He is bringing me with him. Make sure the coffee is hot, and make sure the security team is ready. I lay down on the bed staring at the ceiling. I am going to witness his moment of glory, all right. I am going to watch the light leave his eyes when he realizes that the hand signing the check is the same hand he tried to crush. Tomorrow, Darnell Jenkins learns that you never ever offer a queen a used Corolla. Tomorrow, the ghost comes out to play. The alarm on my phone did not ring. I had been awake since 4 a.m, staring at the ceiling of the guest house, waiting for the sun to rise on the day of my husband's execution. I rolled out of bed and walked to the window. The G-Wagon was still in the driveway. The repo trucks had not come yet because I had instructed Charles to hold them off until noon. I wanted Darnell to drive his status symbol one last time. I wanted him to feel the false security of his leather seats before I stripped the very shirt off his back. I showered and dressed with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Darnell had told me to dress humble. He told me to look like a secretary. So I chose a black dress, It was simple, high-necked, and fell just below the knee. To the untrained eye, it looked like something off the rack at a department store. But it was a vintage piece tailored in Milan, made of a fabric that breathed and moved like a second skin. I pulled my hair back into a low, severe bun. I wore no jewelry, no diamond studs, no watch. Just my bare hands and the weight of the invisible gavel I was about to bang. At 7:45, my phone buzzed. It was Darnell. "Bring the coffee," he texted. "And don't be late. Brad is here." I walked across the frozen lawn to the main house. The morning air was sharp and bit at my exposed skin, but the cold felt clarifying. I entered the kitchen through the back door. The house was still freezing. The power was still out. Darnell and Brad were standing in the foyer, huddled in their coats, using the flashlight from their phones to adjust their ties in the hallway mirror. They looked like caricatures of success. Darnell was wearing a navy blue suit that was too tight in the shoulders, a testament to the weight he had gained from stress eating over the last month. Brad was wearing a charcoal gray three-piece suit with a pinstripe that screamed mid-level banker, trying to look like a hedge fund manager. They smelled of desperation and expensive cologne applied too heavily to mask the scent of fear. "There she is," Brad said, turning around as I entered. He looked me up and down with a sneer of approval. "Well, at least she followed instructions." "You look decent, Simone." "Invisible. That is the look we are going for. Nobody pays attention to the help, right?" Darnell laughed nervously. He was vibrating with anxiety. "Did you get the coffee?" he asked. I held up the carrier tray with 3 cups. "Black for you, latte for Brad," I said. "Good," Darnell said, snatching his cup. He took a sip and grimaced. "It is lukewarm." "The power is out, Darnell," I reminded him. I had to boil the water on the camping stove in the guest house. Whatever he muttered. "Let's go. We can't be late. This is a $5 million morning." We walked out to the driveway. Brad stopped by his car, a flashy BMW sedan, but Darnell shook his head. "We take the G-Wagon," Darnell said. "We need to roll up in style. We need them to see that we are already successful." "Perception is reality, right, Brad?" Brad nodded. "Absolutely. Power moves only. Simone, you sit in the back. And hold this." Brad shoved his heavy leather briefcase into my chest. I grabbed it before it could spill the coffee. "What is in here?" I asked. "The pitch deck," Brad said. "And the financials. Try not to wrinkle them. And don't speak unless someone asks you for a pen. You are there to look like Darnell has a team. You are a prop. Do you understand a prop?" I climbed into the back seat of the G-Wagon. The leather was freezing. Darnell started the engine and the heater roared to life, blasting hot air that smelled of dust. We pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel. I looked back at the house. It stood dark and empty against the gray sky. It was the last time Darnell would ever leave this property as a free man. The drive to downtown Atlanta was a 40-minute sermon from Brad on the art of the deal. He sat in the passenger seat pontificating about leverage and alpha status, while Darnell nodded along like a bobblehead doll. "You have to walk in there like you don't need the money," Brad said, gesturing with his coffee cup. "You have to look the chairman in the eye and make him feel lucky to be in the room with you. That is the secret, Darnell. These investors, they smell weakness. If you flinch, they eat you. But if you act like a king, they bow." I sat in the back, silent, clutching the briefcase that contained the fraudulent documents that would send them both to prison. I listened to Brad talk about dominance, knowing that in less than an hour he would be weeping. They didn't ask me about Malik. They didn't ask how I slept. To them, I was just luggage. I was a necessary inconvenience to be transported from point A to point B. We arrived at the Sterling and Chase building. It was a glass monolith that pierced the skyline, a cathedral of capitalism. I owned the penthouse. I owned the commercial floors. I owned the ground beneath the foundation. Darnell pulled up to the valet stand. He tossed the keys to the attendant with a practiced arrogance. "Keep it close," he said. "We won't be long. We are just going up to sign a check." The valet caught the keys. He looked at Darnell, Then he looked into the back seat and saw me. His eyes widened. He recognized me. He started to open his mouth to say, "Good morning, Madam Jenkins," but I caught his eye in the rearview mirror. I put a single finger to my lips. The valet paused. He swallowed his greeting and simply nodded. "Yes, sir," he said to Darnell. "Good luck." We walked into the lobby. It was a cavernous space of marble and steel echoing with the footsteps of the city's elite. Darnell and Brad strutted toward the security desk, their heels clicking loudly on the stone floor. I walked 5 paces behind them, carrying the briefcase and the empty coffee cups head down, playing the role. Brad pressed the button for the elevator. He checked his reflection in the polished brass doors. "I am telling you, Darnell, after this deal closes, we need to celebrate properly. Vegas, private jet, leave the baggage at home." He jerked his thumb back at me without looking. "You need to upgrade, man. Once you are a multimillionaire, you can't be dragging a Corolla driver around. It ruins the aesthetic." Darnell laughed, but he glanced at me nervously. "She is fine, Brad. She is signing the papers next week. She knows the deal. She is getting the car and the cash, and I am getting the freedom." Brad snorted. $5,000. You are too generous. I would have given her a bus pass and a handshake. The elevator doors pinged and slid open. We stepped inside. It was a private elevator reserved for the executive suites on the top floors. There were no buttons. You had to swipe a key card to select a floor. Darnell fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the visitor pass that had been emailed to him. He scanned it. The light turned green. "Penthouse level," the automated voice announced. The elevator began to rise. My stomach did not drop. It soared. We watched the numbers climb. 10, 20, 30. The air in the elevator felt thin. Brad was still talking, but his voice sounded tinny now, like a radio losing signal. "So when we meet the chairman," Brad said, adjusting his cufflinks, "let me do the talking about the valuation. You just handle the vision. I will dazzle him with the growth projections. I cook those numbers perfectly. They are aggressive enough to be exciting, but vague enough to avoid a lawsuit." I stared at the back of Brad's head. Vague enough to avoid a lawsuit. He had no idea that the chairman had already forensic audited those numbers 3 days ago. He had no idea that the lawsuit was not the danger. The indictment was the danger. We passed the 35th floor. Darnell started to sweat. He wiped his palms on his pants. "Do you think he is scary?" Darnell asked. The chairman, Brad, scoffed. "He is just a guy with a checkbook, Darnell. Probably some old white dude who inherited his daddy's money and thinks he is a genius. We are the real geniuses. We built something from nothing. We are the disruptors." I almost laughed. They were disruptors, all right. They had disrupted my peace. They had disrupted my finances. And now they were about to disrupt their own lives permanently. The elevator slowed. The sensation of weightlessness passed. "40th floor," the voice said. Darnell took a deep breath. He squared his shoulders. He looked at me. "Stay by the door, Simone. Do not come to the table unless I signal you. And for God's sake, fix your face. You look like you are at a funeral." I looked him in the eye. "Maybe I am, Darnell," I whispered. He frowned. "What did you say?" Before he could demand an answer, the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. The lobby of the executive suite was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the entire city of Atlanta. The floors were white marble. The walls were adorned with modern art that cost more than Darnell's entire fictitious company valuation. In the center of the room stood a reception desk made of a single slab of obsidian, and behind it stood Elena. Elena was my personal executive assistant. She was a woman of terrifying efficiency and impeccable taste. She was wearing a Chanel suit and typing on a holographic keyboard. When the elevator doors opened, Elena stopped typing. She stood up. She did not look at Darnell. She did not look at Brad. She looked straight past them, her eyes locking onto mine. Darnell stepped forward, putting on his best winning smile. He extended his hand. "Good morning," he boomed. "I am Darnell Jenkins. I believe the chairman is expecting me." Elena did not take his hand. She did not even acknowledge his voice. She walked around the desk, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble. She walked right past Darnell, forcing him to step aside or be run over. She walked past Brad, who was opening his mouth to make a charming comment. She walked straight to me. I stood there holding the briefcase, wearing my simple black dress. Elena stopped in front of me. She clasped her hands in front of her and bowed her head low. It was a bow of deep deference, a gesture reserved for royalty or the person who signed your six-figure paycheck. "Good morning, Madam Chairman," Elena said, her voice clear and ringing in the silent lobby. She reached out and gently took the briefcase from my hand. "Allow me to take that for you. The board is assembled and waiting for your command." Silence. Absolute crushing silence. I saw Darnell freeze. His hand was still extended in the air, reaching for a handshake that never came. His smile was frozen on his face, twitching slightly at the corners. Brad turned around slowly, his neck craning as if it were rusty. He looked from Elena to me, and then back to Elena. "Excuse me," Brad said, his voice cracking. "Miss, you have made a mistake. That is the wife. That is Simone. She is with us. She is carrying the bags." Elena ignored him. She looked at me, waiting for instructions. "Thank you, Elena," I said. My voice was no longer the soft, submissive whisper of the wife. It was the voice of the ghost. It was the voice that commanded armies of lawyers and moved markets. "Is the coffee fresh?" I asked. "Brewed 5 minutes ago," Madame Elena replied. "Ethiopian yirgacheffe, just as you prefer." "Excellent," I said. I stepped forward. I walked past Brad. I walked past Darnell. I saw Darnell's eyes following me. They were wide, vacant, uncomprehending. He looked like a man watching the laws of physics break down in front of him. "Simone," he whispered. "What? Why did she call you that?" I stopped. I turned slowly to face them. I stood in the center of the lobby, the sunlight streaming in behind me, creating a halo of blinding light. "She called me that, Darnell, because that is my title." I gestured to the massive double doors at the end of the hall. The doors were made of frosted glass, etched with the logo of a bird rising from flames. The logo of Phoenix Capital. Brad started to laugh. It was a frantic, hysterical sound. Okay. Very funny. Is this a prank? Did you hire an actor, Simone? Is this some kind of sick joke to get back at us? You paid the receptionist to call you chairman? That is pathetic, even for you." I didn't answer him. I turned to Elena. "Open the doors, Elena." "Yes, madame." Elena pressed a button on her desk. The heavy glass doors hissed open. Inside, the boardroom was massive. A table long enough to seat 20 people dominated the space, and around that table sat 12 people. I knew them all. There was the district attorney of Atlanta, there was the head of the SEC's fraud division, there was the forensic accountant who had audited Darnell's books, and at the far end of the table, sitting next to an empty chair at the head, was Agent Reynolds of the FBI. They were not smiling. They were not chatting. They were waiting. And when they saw me, all 12 of them stood up in unison. "Good morning, Madame Chairman," they chorused. I looked back at Darnell and Brad. Darnell had stopped breathing. His face was the color of old ash. He looked at the room full of federal agents and prosecutors, and then he looked at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab Brad's arm to stay upright. Brad was no longer laughing. He was staring at Agent Reynolds. He recognized him. He had seen his face on the news. "Oh my God," Brad whispered. "It's a sting." I smiled. "No, Brad," I said. "It is not a sting. It is a board meeting. And as the chairman, I have a few items on the agenda." I gestured to the open doors. "Shall we?" "I hate to keep the FBI waiting. They charge by the hour." I turned and walked into the boardroom. I walked to the head of the table. I stood behind the leather chair that Darnell had dreamed of sitting in. But I didn't sit. I waited. I waited for my husband and his brother-in-law to walk the longest 20 feet of their lives. "Come on in, boys," I called out. "The coffee is hot. But the seat is going to be very, very cold." The heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom hissed shut behind us, sealing us inside a chamber of silence and air-conditioned air that smelled of lemon polish and aggressive capitalism. The room was expansive, a cathedral of commerce designed to make anyone standing inside it feel small. The walls were lined with soundproofing panels disguised as abstract art, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the Atlanta skyline, a view that usually cost a tenant $10,000 a square foot. In the center of the room sat the table. It was a monolith of black walnut, polished to a mirror shine, long enough to land a small aircraft on. Around it were 20 ergonomic leather chairs that looked more like thrones than office furniture. Darnell walked into the room like he was stepping onto a stage. He adjusted his jacket, shooting his cuffs to show off the gold watch I had bought him 3 Christmases ago. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with what he thought was the scent of his future. He didn't look at the view. He didn't look at the art. He looked at the empty chairs, imagining them filled with people who would applaud his genius. Brad was right behind him, but Brad was less confident. The encounter in the lobby with Elena had rattled him. He was still glancing back at the doors, his brow furrowed, trying to process why a receptionist would bow to his sister-in-law. But he shook it off. He had to. The narrative of his life depended on him being the smartest guy in the room, and he couldn't let a strange greeting derail the fraud he was about to perpetrate. I stood by the door, clutching the leather briefcase to my chest. I made myself small. I rounded my shoulders. I lowered my chin. I became the invisible object Darnell needed me to be. Darnell turned to me. The manic energy was vibrating off him in waves. He pointed a shaking finger toward the far corner of the room near a potted fiddle-leaf fig tree. There was a small armless chair there, the kind used for interns or stenographers. "You sit there," Darnell commanded, his voice echoing slightly in the empty room. He walked over to me, invading my personal space, his eyes wild and pleading. "Do not move, Simone. Do not cough. Do not sneeze. And for the love of God, do not try to make small talk. If they ask who you are, you say you are my assistant. You hand them the water. You smile and you fade into the background. Can you do that?" I looked at the small chair in the corner. It was a punishment chair. It was a place for a child who had misbehaved. "I can do that, Darnell," I said softly. "Good," he said. "Now give me the briefcase." I handed him the heavy leather bag. He snatched it from me like I was contaminating it. He marched to the center of the table and slammed it down. He opened it and began pulling out the pitch decks, the colorful graphs that showed a hockey stick growth curve that existed only in his imagination. Brad joined him, plugging his laptop into the HDMI port in the center of the table. The projector screen descended from the ceiling with a low hum. The logo of Jenkins Enterprises filled the wall, a stylized J that looked suspiciously like the logo of a failed crypto exchange. I walked to the corner and sat down. The chair was hard and uncomfortable. From this vantage point, I could see everything. I could see the sweat staining the back of Darnell's shirt. I could see Brad's hands trembling as he arranged his notes. They looked like two little boys playing dress-up in their father's office, completely unaware that the building was burning down around them. "Okay," Brad muttered, checking his watch. "It is 8:55. They should be here any second." Remember, Darnell, if they ask about the burn rate, you pivot to user acquisition. Do not talk about the operational costs. I know, Darnell snapped. "I have the script memorized. I am ready. I was born for this." He walked to the head of the table, the seat reserved for the chairman. He placed his hand on the back of the chair, stroking the leather. "This is it, Brad," he whispered. "After today, I am sitting in chairs like this. No more budget meetings at the kitchen table, no more begging Simone for transfer funds. I am going to be a king." Just then, the double doors opened. They didn't swing open, they were pushed open with a synchronized force. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Darnell spun around, a wide plastic smile plastered on his face. Gentlemen, he boomed, extending his arms. Welcome, I am Darnell Jenkins, and I am Thrill. His voice died in his throat. The people walking into the room were not the tech investors he had expected. They were not wearing hoodies or Allbirds sneakers. They were not smiling. 12 people filed into the room in a single line. They moved with a military precision. They wore gray and navy suits that were tailored but conservative. They carried nothing but thin black folders. They did not look at Darnell. They did not shake his hand. They walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture. Leading the pack was a tall woman with steel gray hair and glasses that looked like they could cut glass. This was Sarah Sterling, the head of the SEC's Enforcement Division for the Southeast region. Behind her was Agent Reynolds of the FBI, looking like a granite statue that had learned to walk. Behind him were forensic accountants, federal prosecutors, and the senior partners of the bank. They filed around the table, taking their seats in perfect silence. The sound of 12 chairs being pulled out and 12 bodies sitting down was the only noise in the room. Darnell lowered his arms. His smile faltered, twitching at the corners. He looked at Brad. Brad was staring at Agent Reynolds, his face draining of color. Brad knew. He recognized the look of law enforcement. He recognized the specific energy of people who had the power to take away your freedom. Darnell stammered, trying to recover. Wonderful to meet you all. I assume the rest of the team is coming. The creative team. Sarah Sterling placed her folder on the table. She looked at Darnell over the rim of her glasses. This is the team, Mr. Jenkins, she said. Her voice was dry and devoid of any warmth. We are the due diligence committee. Oh, Darnell said, forcing a laugh. Right. Due diligence. The numbers guys. I love it. Well, take a seat. Make yourselves comfortable. We have coffee. My assistant can get you some. He gestured vaguely toward my corner. Nobody looked at me. Nobody asked for coffee. Darnell looked at the head of the table. He started to pull out the chairman's chair for himself, assuming he would lead the meeting. Excuse me, Agent Reynolds said. His voice was deep, a bass rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. Darnell froze. That seat is reserved, Reynolds said. Reserved, Darnell asked. For who? For the chairman. Yes, Reynolds said. For the chairman. Darnell laughed nervously. Of course. The chairman. Is he coming? Is he running late? He is here, Reynolds said. Darnell looked around the room confused. He looked at the door. He looked at Brad. I don't see him. I took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. I stood up from the small chair in the corner. The movement caught Darnell's eye. He whipped his head around, his eyes bulging with panic. He made a sharp, cutting motion across his throat, mouthing the words, "Sit down." He thought I was ruining the moment. He thought I was going to offer them a cookie or ask where the bathroom was. He glared at me with pure hatred, silently screaming at me to return to my invisibility. I did not sit down. I smoothed the front of my black dress. I lifted my chin. I took one step forward, then another. The sound of my heels on the marble floor was sharp and deliberate. Click, click, click. Darnell's face turned purple. Simone, he hissed, a sound like steam escaping a pipe. What are you doing? Sit down. You are embarrassing me. I ignored him. I walked past the fiddle leaf fig. I walked past the projector screen, showing his lie of a logo. Brad reached out as I passed him, trying to grab my arm. Simone? Stop, he whispered frantically. This isn't the time. Get back in the corner. I didn't stop. I didn't look at him. I simply kept walking. I walked toward the long black table. Darnell stepped in front of me, blocking my path to the door. He thought I was leaving. Where do you think you are going? He whispered aggressively, grabbing my shoulder. You stay until I dismiss you. I looked at his hand on my shoulder. Then I looked at his eyes. Remove your hand, Darnell, I said. It wasn't a request. It was an order. It was spoken with the authority of the person who owned the mortgage on his soul. Darnell blinked. He was so shocked by the tone of my voice that he actually let go. I stepped around him, but I didn't go to the door. I walked toward the empty chair at the head of the table. Darnell watched me. Brad watched me. The 12 federal agents and prosecutors watched me. The room held its breath. Darnell's confusion morphed into horror as he realized where I was going. "Simone," he shouted, forgetting to whisper. "No, that is the chairman's seat. Are you crazy? Get away from there. You are going to ruin the deal." I reached the head of the table. I placed my hand on the high back of the leather chair. It felt cool and substantial. It felt like justice. I looked down the long expanse of the table. I looked at Sarah Sterling. I looked at Agent Reynolds. They nodded at me. One single, unified nod of recognition. Darnell rushed forward, his hands outstretched, intending to physically pull me away from the sacred seat of power. "You stupid woman," he yelled. "Get back in the corner. You are just the wife. You are nobody." Agent Reynolds stood up. He didn't draw a weapon, but the way he moved made it clear he was the weapon. "Sit down, Mr. Jenkins," Reynolds barked. Darnell froze, torn between his rage at me and his fear of the giant man in the suit. "But she is sitting in the chairman's seat," Darnell sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Tell her to move." I pulled the chair out. The wheels glided silently on the carpet. I turned and sat down. I rested my elbows on the armrests. I clasped my hands in front of me. I leaned back, looking every inch the queen of this castle. I looked at Darnell, who was standing there with his mouth open, his brain unable to process the image before him. The wife who rode the bus. The wife who needed a Corolla. The wife he was divorcing for a hashtag. She was sitting in the throne. "I am not sitting in the chairman's seat, Darnell," I said. My voice was calm, amplified by the acoustics of the room, carrying to every corner, filling every ear. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it screamed. "I am sitting in my seat." Darnell shook his head, a spasm of denial. "No," he whispered. "No. That's impossible. You are broke. You are a secretary." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "I am Phoenix Capital Darnell." I gestured to the room, to the agents, to the prosecutors, to the bankers. "And this isn't a pitch meeting." I picked up the black folder that Sarah Sterling had placed on the table. I opened it. "This is an audit." Brad made a sound like a dying animal. He slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He understood. He had done the math. But Darnell was still standing, swaying slightly, looking at me like I was a monster that had just ripped off a human mask. "You," he choked out. "You are the investor. I am the owner." I corrected him. "I am the bank. I am the landlord. And as of this morning, I am the plaintiff." I turned to Elena, who had quietly entered the room and was standing by the door with a pot of fresh coffee. "Elena," I said, "Mr. Jenkins looks like he is about to faint. Please pour him a cup of coffee." I looked back at my husband. "Sit down, Darnell. We have a lot to discuss. Specifically paragraph 4 of that separation agreement you were so eager to sign." Darnell's legs gave out. He collapsed into the nearest chair, staring at me with the eyes of a man who had just watched his own funeral procession begin. The trap was closed, the key was turned, and I was holding the gavel. Darnell slumped into the chair to my right, the one usually reserved for the vice president of operations. He looked like a marionette whose strings had been cut. His mouth was opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. He stared at me, then at the nameplate on the desk that read Phoenix Capital Chairman, then back at me. His brain was trying to bridge the gap between the woman he had ordered to ride the bus yesterday and the woman who was currently commanding a room full of federal agents. It was a bridge too far. Brad, however, was not ready to surrender. He was a man built on arrogance and cheap cologne, and his ego would not allow him to accept defeat without a fight. He stood up, smoothing his jacket, a forced, condescending smile plastered on his face. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the silent agents, treating them like an audience to a bad joke. "Okay," he said, clapping his hands together once. "Very good. I have to admit, Simone, this is impressive. Really, you went all out." "Who are these people?" "Actors from the local theater guild. How much did you pay them? Did you dip into the savings account Darnell let you keep?" "This is a cute skit, sweetheart. It really is. But we have a meeting with the real chairman in 5 minutes, so if you could just wrap up this little fantasy camp, we can get back to business." He turned to Agent Reynolds, who was sitting like a stone statue. "And you, big guy, you look the part. Very menacing. But impersonating a federal officer is a felony, you know. I hope she paid you enough to cover the bail." Agent Reynolds did not blink. He slowly reached into his jacket pocket. Brad flinched, thinking it was a weapon. Reynolds pulled out a leather wallet, flipped it open, and slid it across the polished table. The gold badge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation gleamed under the boardroom lights. Next to it was his ID card, complete with a hologram that shifted as it spun. "Special Agent Marcus Reynolds," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Financial Crimes Division. And I assure you, Mr. Miller, my salary is paid by the taxpayers, not by Mrs. Jenkins." Brad stared at the badge. He reached out a trembling finger and poked it, as if testing if it were real metal. When he felt the cold weight of the badge, the color drained from his face so fast it looked like a magic trick. He looked at Sarah Sterling from the SEC. She silently placed her credentials on the table next to Reynolds. Then the district attorney did the same. Click, click, click. The sound of badges hitting the table was the only noise in the room. Brad sank back into his chair. He looked at Darnell. "Darnell," he whispered. "Darnell, this is real." Darnell didn't answer. He was looking at me. How he croaked. "How is this possible? You are my wife. I know everything about you. I check the accounts. I see the grocery bills. You ask me for money to buy diapers." I leaned back in the chairman's chair, crossing my legs. "You see what I want you to see, Darnell. You see the wife. You never looked for the woman. Did you really think I spent 5 years just scheduling dentist appointments? Did you think I bought this suit at an outlet mall?" I gestured to the view of the city behind me. "I bought this building 3 years ago. Darnell. Under a blind trust. The same trust that funded your little startup. Did you never wonder why your angel investor never asked to meet you? Did you never wonder why the money always came through exactly when you were about to bounce a check?" Darnell shook his head. I thought it was because I was a genius. I thought they believed in the vision." I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "The vision, Darnell, your business model, is a Ponzi scheme wrapped in a rideshare app. The only reason you are not in jail already is because I was the one funding it. I was paying myself back with my own money just to keep you feeling important. I was buying you a career because I thought it would make you a better man. But it didn't. It just made you a monster." Brad slammed his hand on the table. "This is entrapment," he shouted, trying to pivot to a legal defense. "You funded the company. That means you are complicit. If we go down for fraud, you go down too. You are the majority shareholder." I smiled. I had been waiting for this. I picked up the black leather briefcase that Darnell had forced me to carry. I opened it and pulled out a single document. It was the document Darnell had signed last night in the drunken haze of his victory. The document he hadn't bothered to read. I slid it across the table. It stopped right in front of Darnell. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. Darnell looked down. "It is the divorce papers," he mumbled. "The ones I signed last night." "So what?" "It says I get everything. I get the company." I nodded. "Read page 4. Darnell. Paragraph 7. Clause B." Darnell squinted at the paper. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled against the wood. "The assignee Darnell Jenkins hereby accepts full and sole liability for all corporate debts, liens, and legal obligations associated with Jenkins Enterprises. He read slowly. Keep reading, I commanded. Including but not limited to any outstanding judgments, tax liabilities, and criminal penalties resulting from historical mismanagement, the assigner Simone Jenkins is hereby indemnified and absolved of all financial responsibility. Darnell stopped reading. He looked up at me. What does that mean? He whispered. It means, I said, leaning forward, that as of midnight last night you own it all, Darnell. You own the G-Wagon. You own the office lease. You own the server bills. And most importantly, you own the debt. I turned to Charles Sterling, my banker. Charles, what is the current debt load of Jenkins Enterprises? Charles opened his laptop. Principal loan, $5 million. Unpaid interest, $200,000. Penalties for default, $150,000. Total immediate liability, $5,350,000. Darnell's eyes rolled back in his head for a second. 5 million. But the email. You said Phoenix Capital was investing 5 million. I stood up. I walked around the table until I was standing right behind Darnell. I placed my hands on the back of his chair. He flinched like I had burned him. I am Phoenix Capital Darnell. And I am not investing. I leaned down and whispered in his ear. I am calling the loan. I straightened up and looked at the room. The email was a demand for payment, Darnell, not an offer. You came here today thinking you were going to get a check, but you are here to write one. I walked back to the head of the table and sat down, so I asked, Do you have $5 million? Darnell? Darnell looked at Brad. Brad, do we have it? The accounts, the offshore stuff. Brad was weeping. Actual tears were running down his face. He was shaking his head. It is gone, Darnell. She froze it. The accounts are locked. We have nothing. We can't even pay for parking. Darnell turned back to me. He slid out of his chair and fell to his knees. It was pathetic. It was the same man who had told me to take the bus, now kneeling on the marble floor, in a suit I paid for, begging for his life. Simone, please, you can't do this. We are family. I am Malik's father. You can't ruin me. I signed that paper without looking. I didn't know ignorance is not a legal defense, Sarah Sterling said from across the table, especially for a CEO. I looked down at him. Stand up, Darnell. You are embarrassing yourself. He scrambled to his feet, wiping his eyes. Okay. I will fix this. I will sign the company back to you. Take it. Take the company. Just forgive the debt. Please, I don't want the company anymore. I laughed again. You think I want that company, Darnell? That company is a shell. It is worthless. I don't want the brand. I don't want the app. I picked up the heavy crystal gavel that sat on the table. I want the assets. I turned to Agent Reynolds. Agent, is the warrant ready? Reynolds nodded. Signed by a federal judge this morning, Madam Chairman. Warrant. Brad shrieked. What warrant? For the seizure of collateral, I said. I looked at Darnell. You personally guaranteed the loan, Darnell. That means when the company can't pay, you pay. With your personal assets. I started counting on my fingers. The house in Buckhead. Seized. The G-Wagon downstairs. Seized. The contents of your bank accounts. Seized. Your watch. Seized. I pointed to his wrist. Take it off, Darnell. What? He gasped, clutching his wrist. No. You gave me this. It was bought with company funds, I said coldly. That makes it company property, and since the company is in default, it belongs to the creditor. That is me. Take it off. He hesitated. Agent Reynolds stood up. Do it, son, Reynolds rumbled. Darnell unclasped the watch with trembling fingers. He slid it across the table. It spun and stopped in front of me. I didn't pick it up. Now the ring, I said. Darnell looked at his wedding band. Simone, please, the ring. Darnell, you are divorced, remember? You wanted to be a single man. Be single. He pulled the ring off. He threw it on the table. I looked at Brad. And you, Brad. I believe you advised Darnell on these financial moves? Brad nodded frantically. I was just a consultant. I didn't sign anything. No, I said. But you did engage in insider trading using the company accounts. We have the logs. We have the recordings from yesterday where you admitted to laundering cartel money. Brad's face went blank. You heard that I heard everything I said. I pointed to the door. Agent Reynolds. I believe these gentlemen are trespassing in my boardroom, and since they cannot pay the $5 million debt, I would like to initiate immediate liquidation proceedings. Darnell grabbed the edge of the table. Liquidation. What does that mean? What are you going to do? I stood up and smoothed my dress. It means, Darnell, that you didn't come here to get rich. You came here to settle a tab. I picked up the folder containing the deed to the house. You are here to hand over the keys. You are here to sign the surrender forms. And when you walk out of those doors, you will own exactly what you had when you met me. Nothing. Darnell looked at the agents, then at the empty chair where he thought he would sit, and finally at me. But where will I go? He whispered. I have no car. I have no home. I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. I hear the number 81 bus stops right outside Darnell. It is a bit chilly today, so you might want to run. I slammed the folder shut. Meeting adjourned. The silence in the boardroom was heavy, broken only by the sound of Darnell's wedding band spinning on the mahogany table before coming to a rest in front of me. He stood there, stripped of his watch, his ring, and his dignity, looking like a man who had just woken up in a nightmare. But while Darnell was broken, Brad was vibrating with the frantic energy of a rat looking for an exit. Brad cleared his throat, adjusting his tie with trembling hands. He looked at Agent Reynolds, then at Sarah Sterling, and finally settled his gaze on Darnell, his eyes hardening. Well, Brad said, his voice high and tight. This is tragic. Truly tragic. Darnell, I told you that personal guarantee was risky. I advised against it. But you were so confident. You were so sure you could make the company profitable. Darnell whipped his head around, staring at his brother-in-law in disbelief. You advised against it, Darnell sputtered. You told me it was standard procedure. You told me it was a formality. You said if I didn't sign it, I didn't believe in myself. Brad held up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. I am a consultant, Darnell. I give options. You make decisions. You are the CEO. You sign the papers. And frankly, this mismanagement, this fraud, I had no idea it was this deep. I thought we were building an app. If I had known you were cooking the books, I would have resigned months ago. He turned to Agent Reynolds, putting on his best innocent citizen face. Officer, I am willing to cooperate fully. I have files. I have emails. I can show you that I was just a third-party vendor. I was duped, just like the investors. Darnell Jenkins is the mastermind here. I am just a victim of his ambition. The audacity was breathtaking. Brad was throwing Darnell into the fire to save his own skin, rewriting history in real time. Darnell looked like he had been punched in the gut. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but he had no words. He had trusted Brad implicitly. He had let Brad guide every move, sign, every check draft, every lie. And now the architect was watching the building collapse and blaming the bricklayer. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my steepled fingers. A victim, I repeated softly. Is that what you are, Brad? A victim? Brad nodded vigorously. Yes, absolutely. I have a reputation in this town. I work for a major bank. I would never jeopardize my career for a failed startup. I was trying to help family, and look where it got me. Associated with a fraudster. I tapped the screen of the tablet embedded in the table in front of me. That is a compelling story, Brad, I said. But it conflicts slightly with the narrative you were spinning yesterday morning in Darnell's office. Brad froze. What do you mean? I said that I enjoy listening to podcasts, especially the unreleased ones recorded by my own surveillance equipment. I pressed a button on the console. Elena, play Exhibit A. The speakers in the boardroom ceiling crackled to life. The audio quality was pristine. Brad's voice filled the room loud and clear, echoing off the glass walls. There are no investors, Darnell. Phoenix Capital isn't a tech fund, it is a washing machine, and we are the laundromat. Darnell gasped. He looked at the ceiling, then at Brad. The recording continued. My clients have a lot of cash. Cash that comes from pharmaceuticals. Cash that comes from imports that do not go through customs. They need a place to put that cash to make it look clean. That is what your company is. Brad's face turned a color I had never seen on a human being before. It was a mix of gray and green, the color of dead moss. He looked at the recorder, then at me, his eyes bulging. That is AI, he shouted. That is a deepfake. She generated that voice. I never said that I ignored him. I let the recording play on. We need to discredit her. We need to make sure that if she ever talks, no one listens. Postpartum psychosis. It is a real condition, very tragic. We get Dr. Eris to sign off on an emergency evaluation. We pick her up, we put her in a 72-hour hold. The room went dead silent. The federal agents were not looking at the speakers. They were looking at Brad. Their expressions were not of surprise, but of cold, professional disgust. Darnell was staring at Brad with a look of pure betrayal. You were going to put her in a psych ward, Darnell whispered. You said it was for her own good. You said she was sick. But you just wanted to shut her up. The recording played the final nail in the coffin. She will never see that kid again, and you will be the hero who saved his son from a madwoman. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was louder than the shouting had been. I looked at Brad. He was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He was sweating profusely, the drops running down his face and dripping onto his expensive suit. Deepfake, I asked. Because it sounds a lot like conspiracy to commit medical fraud, kidnapping, and money laundering. And I believe Agent Reynolds has verified the voice print against your employee calls at the bank. Is that correct? Agent Reynolds nodded slowly. 100% match, Madam Chairman. We also have the text messages to Dr. Eris confirming the arrangement. Brad slumped back in his chair. The fight went out of him. He looked small. He looked like what he was, a mediocre man who thought he could outsmart the world. But I wasn't done. I didn't just want to put him in jail. I wanted to destroy his ego. I wanted Darnell to see exactly how stupid he had been. I turned to Darnell. You know, Darnell, the saddest part isn't that Brad used you to launder money. The saddest part is that while he was using you, he was also stealing from you. Darnell looked at me confused. Stealing, but we didn't have any money to steal. We were broke. I swiped the tablet screen, sending a spreadsheet to the main projector. You were broke, Darnell. Brad was doing quite well. I pointed to the rows of red numbers. Look at this ledger. This is the operating account for Jenkins Enterprises. You see these monthly outflows labeled IT consulting services, $15,000 a month. Darnell nodded. Yeah, that is for the server maintenance. Brad said we needed high-level security for the app data. I clicked on the entry. It expanded to show the recipient bank account. The money didn't go to a server farm, Darnell. It went to a shell company called Miller Consulting Group, LLC. Registered in Nevada. I swiped to the next slide. And here is the bank statement for Miller Consulting. See the withdrawals: BMW Financial Services, the Ritz-Carlton, Saks Fifth Avenue. I looked at Darnell. He was charging you $15,000 a month to maintain servers that didn't exist, and he was using your money to pay for the lease on his car and the dinners he bought for your sister. Darnell looked at Brad. His mouth fell open. You charged me for servers, but the app doesn't even have users. We don't have data. Brad looked down at the table, refusing to meet Darnell's eyes. I was consulting, Brad mumbled. My advice is expensive. I laughed. Your advice? Your advice was to take out a high-interest loan that I owned. Your advice was to sign a personal guarantee that cost Darnell his house. That is some expensive advice, Brad. I pulled up another slide. And let's talk about the big one. The $3 million from the cartel. The money you moved through the company last week. Brad flinched. I don't know what you're talking about. I pointed to the screen. Here is the wire transfer. Incoming from a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. Outgoing to a construction company in Miami, owned by a known associate of the Sinaloa cartel. But look at the transaction fee. I zoomed in on the numbers. The transfer was for $3 million, but only $2.8 million went out. $200,000 stayed behind. Darnell looked at the screen. Where did it go? I clicked the link. It went to a personal account at a bank in Zurich, an account under the name Bradford Miller. I looked at Brad. You skimmed off the top, Brad. You stole from the cartel. Do you know what happens to people who steal from the cartel? Brad's face went from pale to ghostly white. He started to shake. I didn't steal it. It was a fee. A processing fee. I leaned back. You better hope the FBI gets to you before your clients do, Brad. Because federal prison is a country club compared to what they will do to you for shorting them $200,000. Darnell stood up. He walked over to Brad. He grabbed Brad by the lapels of his suit and shook him. You stole from me. You stole from the drug dealers. You ruined my life for a processing fee. I trusted you. You were family. Brad shoved Darnell away. Family? You are an idiot, Darnell. You were a useful idiot. You think you are a CEO. You can't even read a balance sheet. I did everything. I set up the accounts. I brought in the cash. You just sat there and played pretend. Of course I took a fee. I earned it. I had to listen to your delusions of grandeur for 3 years. Darnell pulled back his fist to punch him, but Agent Reynolds moved faster than a man his size should be able to. Sit down, Reynolds barked. Both of you. Darnell froze. He looked at me ashamed. He realized finally that he wasn't a victim of his wife. He was a victim of his own blindness. He sank back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. I am so stupid, he sobbed. I am so stupid. I didn't offer him comfort. He didn't deserve it. I looked at Agent Reynolds. I believe we have heard enough, Agent. The evidence is conclusive, the confession is recorded, and the financial trail is clear. Reynolds nodded. He tapped his earpiece. Move in. The double doors of the boardroom burst open. 4 uniformed FBI agents marched in. They weren't carrying briefcases. They were carrying handcuffs. They walked straight to the table. Brad stood up, knocking his chair over. He looked at the window as if contemplating jumping. Don't even think about it, Reynolds said. 2 agents grabbed Brad. They spun him around and slammed him against the glass wall. The view of the city he wanted to conquer was now the backdrop for his downfall. Bradford Miller, Reynolds announced, his voice booming. You are under arrest for money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit kidnapping and racketeering. Brad screamed as the cuffs clicked tight. This is a mistake. I have immunity. I want to make a deal, Simone. Tell them I can help. I looked at him, pressed against the glass, his face distorted by fear. You can't help me, Brad, I said calmly, but you can help yourself. Start practicing your cellmate etiquette. I hear the cartel has a long reach. The agents dragged Brad toward the door. He was kicking and screaming, begging Darnell to help him, begging me to stop them. Darnell just sat there, weeping silently, unable to look at the man he had idolized. As they hauled Brad out of the room, Agent Reynolds turned to Darnell. He pulled out a second pair of handcuffs. Darnell looked up. He stopped crying. He looked at the cuffs, then at Reynolds. Me too, he whispered. Reynolds looked at me. That is up to the chairman, Reynolds said. He is technically an accomplice. He signed the papers. But if he cooperates, if he testifies against Miller, and if the primary creditor declines to press charges for the fraud against the holding company. Darnell looked at me. His eyes were wide, pleading. He was a child again. A child who had broken a window and was waiting to see if his mother would tell his father. Simone, he choked out. Please, Malik needs a father. I will do anything. I will sign anything. Just don't let them take me. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had left me on the curb. I picked up the crystal gavel. I turned it over in my hands. He was ruined. He was homeless. He was penniless. Prison would be easy for him. He would be fed. He would be housed. No, I wanted him to suffer in the real world. I wanted him to struggle. I wanted him to work. I looked at Reynolds. He is a fool, Agent. But he is a useful fool. If he agrees to a full confession and surrenders all assets immediately, I am willing to petition for leniency on the criminal charges. Let him be a witness. Reynolds nodded. Your call, Madame Chairman. I looked at Darnell. You are not going to jail today, Darnell. He sobbed with relief. Thank you. Oh, God. Thank you, Simone. But I continued, my voice hard as diamond. You are leaving this building with the clothes on your back, and you are going to spend the rest of your life knowing that you had it all, and you threw it away for a man who charged you for imaginary servers. Get him out of my sight. Reynolds gestured to the door. Let's go, Mr. Jenkins. We have a statement to type up. Darnell stood up shakily. He looked at me one last time. Simone. Go, I said. He walked out of the room. His shoulders slumped, a broken man. I watched the doors close behind them. The room was quiet again. Sarah Sterling looked at me and smiled. That was efficient. I took a sip of my coffee. It is not over, Sarah. We still have to deal with the assets. I looked at the empty chairs. But for now, the trash has been taken out. Darnell stood on the sidewalk outside the Sterling and Chase building, the wind whipping through his thin dress shirt. He had no coat. He had no phone. He had no wallet. The FBI had seized them all as evidence. For the first time in his adult life, he was not just broke. He was a ghost in the system. He looked left, then right, instinctively reaching for a car key that was no longer in his pocket. The valet stand was empty. The G-Wagon was already on a flatbed truck, somewhere headed to an impound lot. He had to get home. He had to warn his mother. He had to salvage whatever he could before the inevitable wave of foreclosure crashed down on the only life he knew. He started to run. He ran past the bus stop where he had told me to wait just 3 days ago. He ran until his lungs burned, and his expensive Italian loafers, which were blistering his heels, felt like torture devices. He ran for 3 miles before he collapsed onto a public bench, wheezing sweat staining his armpits. He looked up and saw the number 81 bus approaching. He patted his pockets. Nothing. Not a dime. He couldn't even afford the ride to hell. He had to walk. It took him 3 hours. 3 hours of walking through the neighborhoods he used to speed through, sneering at the pedestrians. Now he was one of them. When he finally turned the corner onto the street of our gated community, the sun was beginning to set, casting long bruised shadows across the pavement. But even from a distance, he could see that the gate was open. Not just open, but broken, the mechanical arm bent upward at an unnatural angle. A large white truck was parked in the driveway of the estate. It wasn't a moving van. It was a foreclosure enforcement unit. Darnell sprinted the last 100 yards, his legs screaming in protest. As he crested the hill, the full scope of the devastation came into view. The house, the magnificent colonial mansion he had bragged about on LinkedIn, looked like an autopsy was being performed on it. The front doors were wide open. Men in gray jumpsuits were carrying furniture out onto the lawn. Not carefully. They were hauling it. His mahogany desk, the one he had sat behind while pretending to be a CEO, was dumped unceremoniously onto the damp grass. And there, sitting on the curb near the mailbox, were Beatrice and Ebony. They looked like refugees from a high-fashion disaster. Beatrice was wrapped in her fur coat, but it was muddy at the hem. She was clutching a pile of handbags, her knuckles white. Ebony was sitting next to her, crying into her knees, surrounded by piles of shoes that had been tossed out of the house like garbage. Mom Darnell screamed, stumbling toward them. Beatrice looked up. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks. When she saw Darnell, she didn't look relieved. She looked furious. She scrambled to her feet, dropping a Louis Vuitton bag in the dirt. "Darnell," she shrieked, "do something! These men, they just barged in. They changed the locks. They are taking the television. They are taking the rugs. Tell them who you are. Tell them to stop." Darnell stopped in front of her, panting, his hands on his knees. "I can't, Mom," he wheezed. "I can't stop them. It is over. What do you mean it is over?" Beatrice screamed, grabbing his lapels and shaking him. "You went to the meeting. You got the money. Where is the $5 million? Where is the check?" Darnell looked at her, his eyes hollow. "There is no money, Mom. It was a trap. Simone, she owns it all. She called the loan. She seized the house." Beatrice froze. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Then she turned to the repo man who was currently taping a seizure notice to the front gate. "You can't do this," she yelled at him. "This is my house. I have assets. I have valuables." She pointed to the pile of handbags on the curb. "These bags are worth $50,000. Take them as collateral. Just leave the furniture." The repo man, a burly guy named Mike, who looked like he had seen everything, chuckled. He walked over to the pile of bags. He picked up the Louis Vuitton tote Beatrice had been clutching. He inspected the stitching. He sniffed the leather. He tossed it back onto the pile with a look of disgust. "Lady," he said, his voice rough and amused, "I can't take these. We only seize assets with value." "Value?" Beatrice sputtered. "That is a limited edition. Never full. I bought it from a boutique in Buckhead." Mike shook his head. "You bought it from a trunk lady. This is vinyl. The stitching is wrong. The serial number is missing. It is a knockoff, a bad one." He kicked a pair of red-bottom shoes near Ebony's feet. "And these painted plastic." He looked at Beatrice with pity. "Your whole collection is fake, ma'am. Just like the credit rating on this house. We don't want your trash. You can keep it." Beatrice stared at the bag. She had spent years flaunting these items at church, looking down on women who carried Coach or Michael Kors. She had built her entire identity on the brand names draped across her arm. And now a man in a grease-stained jumpsuit was telling her that her life was a counterfeit. "No," she whispered. "That is impossible. I paid cash. I paid—" "You got scammed," Mike said, walking away. "Probably by the same person who told you this house was yours." Ebony let out a wail. "My followers," she cried, looking at her phone, which had no signal because the family plan had been canceled an hour ago. "I posted these shoes. Everyone thinks we are rich. Darnell, you have to fix this. I can't be homeless. I am an influencer." Darnell sank down onto the curb next to his sister. He put his head in his hands. "I have nothing," he whispered. "She took my watch. She took my ring. I walked home. Ebony, I walked all the way from downtown." Beatrice stood over him, trembling with rage. "Simone," she hissed, "this is all her doing. That witch, that ungrateful, spiteful little—" She stopped. A low hum filled the air. It wasn't the sound of a truck. It was a deep, purring vibration that you felt in your chest before you heard it. They all looked up. Turning into the driveway, gliding past the broken gate like a shark entering a swimming pool, was a car. It wasn't a Toyota Corolla. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Extended wheelbase, midnight black paint that seemed to absorb the fading light. The chrome grille gleamed like the teeth of a monster. The Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament stood proud on the front, leading the way. The car moved slowly, crunching over the gravel with a heavy, expensive sound. It pulled up right next to the curb where the Jenkins family sat, amidst their fake luxury and real ruin. The repo men stopped working to watch. Even they knew respect when they saw it. Darnell stared at the car. He knew cars. He knew this car cost $500,000. He knew it was the kind of car that wasn't just bought, it was commissioned. The car came to a silent halt. The back window tinted so dark it looked like onyx slowly hummed down. I sat in the back seat. I had removed the black jacket, revealing the simple elegance of my dress. I held a glass of sparkling water in my hand. The interior of the car was cream leather and walnut wood, a warm, glowing cocoon of absolute power. I looked out at them. They looked pathetic. Beatrice in her muddy furs, Darnell in his sweaty, rumpled suit, Ebony clutching a plastic shoe. They were huddled together on the concrete, the very picture of the poverty they had mocked me for. Simone, Darnell whispered. He scrambled to his feet. He rushed toward the car, but he stopped short, afraid to touch the paint. Simone, is that your car? I took a sip of water. Hello, Darnell, I said. My voice was amplified by the silence of the evening. I see the movers have arrived, punctual. I pay them for efficiency. Beatrice ran to the window. She pushed Darnell out of the way. She grabbed the window ledge with her dirty hands. Simone, you have to stop this. Look at us. We are on the street. It is cold. Your nephew, my grandson, he needs a home. I looked at her hands dirtying my car. Remove your hands. Beatrice, I said softly. She snatched them back as if she had been burned. Malik has a home, I said. He is in the guest house. With his nanny. He is warm, he is fed, and he is safe from people who value vinyl bags over human beings. Darnell fell to his knees beside the car. He was weeping openly now. Simone, please. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I didn't know. Brad made me do it. I was weak. But I learned my lesson. Look at me. I am humiliated. Isn't that enough? Can't we just go back? I will be better. I will work for you. I will drive the car. I will do anything. Just let me come inside. Let me come home. I looked down at him. I remembered the man who had stood over my hospital bed and told me I was a burden. I remembered the man who had laughed while I struggled with the stroller on the bus. Go back, I asked. Go back to what, Darnell? To you pretending to be the king while I pay the bills, to you treating me like a servant in my own house. I shook my head. There is no going back. The bridge is burned, and you are standing on the wrong side of the river. Ebony crawled over. Simone, she cried. I am sorry I called you a parasite. I was jealous. I swear. Can I just stay in the guest house? Just for tonight, I have nowhere to go. My friends, they won't answer my calls because I can't pay for the Uber to get to them. I looked at Ebony, the girl who had stolen money from my son's college fund to buy boots. You have legs, Ebony, I said. Use them. I hear the shelter downtown opens at 6. If you start walking now, you might beat the rush. Beatrice let out a howl of indignation. You are evil. You are sending your own family to a shelter. After everything we did for you, we took you in. We gave you a name. You gave me nothing. I snapped, my voice finally rising, cracking the air like a whip. You took my money, you took my patience, you took my love, and you threw it in the trash like a receipt. You didn't take me in, Beatrice. I bought you. I bought this house. I bought your clothes. I bought the food in your stomach. And now the subscription has expired. I pressed the button to roll up the window. Wait! Darnell screamed, jamming his fingers into the gap. Simone. Wait. What about the Corolla? You promised me a Corolla. You said if I let you come to the meeting, you would give me a car. I paused the window. I looked at him through the narrow slit. I stared into his desperate, greedy eyes. Even now, at the end of the world, he was trying to make a deal. I signaled to the driver. My driver, a massive man named Tiny, who used to work security for me, opened his door. He walked around to the trunk. He opened it and pulled out a small, rusty object. He walked over and dropped it at Darnell's feet. It clattered on the pavement. It was a bicycle chain. I didn't promise you a Corolla, Darnell, I said. I said I would help with your transportation. I pointed to the garage. There is an old bike in the shed behind the guest house. It has a flat tire, but the frame is solid. It should get you to the unemployment office. But, Darnell stammered, the car, The Corolla was a test, Darnell, I said. And just like everything else in your life, you failed. I looked at the repo man who was watching with a grin. Mike, I called out. Yes, Madam Chairman, Mike replied, tipping his hat. Make sure they are off the property in 10 minutes, I said. If they are still here, turn the sprinklers on. It is going to be a freezing night. I wouldn't want them to catch a cold. You got it, Mike said. I looked at my husband one last time. Goodbye, Darnell. Try not to scratch the bike. It is the most valuable thing you own now. I pressed the button. The window hummed shut, sealing me back into the warmth. Drive, I said to Tiny. The Rolls-Royce accelerated smoothly. I didn't look back. But I heard it. I heard Darnell screaming my name. I heard Beatrice cursing the heavens. And then I heard the sound of the sprinklers hissing to life, spraying ice-cold water over the manicured lawns, soaking the fake Louis Vuitton bags and the people who cherished them. The cleansing had begun. The sprinklers were relentless. They were not the gentle misting kind used for flower beds. These were industrial-grade irrigation heads designed to saturate an acre of lawn in 10 minutes. The water arched high into the freezing evening air and came down in icy sheets, soaking Darnell, Beatrice, and Ebony to the bone. I watched from the back seat of the Rolls-Royce as the water ruined the last vestiges of their pride. Beatrice was screaming, holding her fake fur coat over her head like a tent, but the water was heavy and cold. It matted the cheap synthetic fibers until they looked like the wet fur of a drowned rat. Ebony was slipping on the wet grass in her plastic-soled shoes, her makeup running in black rivers down her face, and Darnell stood in the middle of it all, his arms hanging limp at his sides, staring at my tinted window water, dripping from his nose and chin. I tapped the intercom button. Tiny stopped the car for a moment. The massive vehicle came to a halt just before the open gate. The engine purred so quietly it was almost imperceptible. Inside, it was warm, smelling of jasmine and expensive leather. Outside, it was a scene of wet, miserable chaos. I pressed the button to lower the window just halfway. The hum of the glass sliding down was the only warning Darnell got. He heard it. He looked up, wiping water from his eyes. He saw my face framed in the darkness of the car interior, dry, calm, and utterly untouchable. He ran over to the car. He didn't care about the mud splashing onto his suit pants. He grabbed the window ledge, his fingers white with cold. "Simone," he gasped. His teeth were chattering violently. "You have to help us. Please. Look at my mother. She is shivering. She is an old woman. You can't leave her out here. The police won't let us back in. The repo guys took the keys. We have nothing." I looked past him at Beatrice. She was huddled under a tree, shivering so hard her entire body was vibrating. She looked small. She looked frail. For a second, a very brief second, I felt a flicker of pity. But then I remembered the hospital. I remembered her standing over my bed while I was bleeding, telling me I wasn't good enough. I remembered her calling my son a mistake. I remembered the $12,000 she spent on handbags while my mortgage went into default. The pity evaporated like steam. "Darnell," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the rushing water. "You are asking me for help. That is interesting, because 3 days ago when I asked you for a ride home from the hospital, do you remember what you said?" Darnell winced. "I know, Simone. I know I messed up. I was selfish. But this is different. This is survival. We don't have a car. We don't have phones. How are we supposed to leave? How are we supposed to get to a hotel?" I looked at him. "A hotel, Darnell? You don't have any money for a hotel. Your cards are declined. Your accounts are seized." Darnell gripped the window tighter. "Then where do we go? We can't stay here. We will freeze to death. Simone, you have to drive us. Just drive us to the city. Please, there is plenty of room in there. Look at that back seat. We can all fit. Just one ride for old time's sake." He looked at the empty seat next to me. He looked at the warmth. He looked at the safety. He wanted to be saved one last time. He wanted the woman he had discarded to pick him up, dust him off, and solve his problems. He wanted me to be his mother, his banker, and his servant. I reached into my purse. It was a Hermes Birkin sitting on the seat beside me. The leather creaked softly as I opened the clasp. Darnell's eyes lit up. He saw the movement. Hope flooded his face, pathetic and desperate. "You are writing a check?" he asked, his voice trembling with relief. "Oh, thank God. Thank you, Simone. I knew you still loved me. I knew you wouldn't let us suffer. Just give me enough for a few nights at the Marriott. I will pay you back, I swear." I dug through the contents of my bag. I moved past the stack of $100 bills I kept for emergencies. I moved past the platinum credit cards. I moved past the key to the private jet hangar. I found what I was looking for in the side pocket. It was a single crumpled $5 bill. I pulled it out. I smoothed it against my knee. Abraham Lincoln looked up at me. It was a humble bill, a bill for small things, a bill for a sandwich, or a fare. I held it up. Darnell looked at it. His smile faded. Confusion crinkled his wet forehead. $5, he whispered. What? What is that for? I handed it to him through the window. The wind caught it fluttering the edges, but Darnell grabbed it reflexively. He held the damp bill in his shaking hand, staring at it as if it were an alien object. "You asked how you are going to get your mother to a place to sleep," I said. I pointed to the end of the street where the streetlights were just flickering on. "The number 81 bus stops at the corner in 12 minutes, Darnell." Darnell stared at me. His mouth fell open. The bus, he choked out. "You want me to take the bus with my mother? With all these bags?" I nodded slowly. "The fare is $2.50 per person. Since Ebony is young, she can walk. This $5 will cover you and Beatrice." I leaned closer to the window. "It is a direct line to the downtown shelter, Darnell. It is warm, it is dry, and it is exactly the transportation you offered me when I had a newborn baby in my arms." Darnell looked at the bill, then at the Rolls-Royce, then back at me. The realization hit him. This wasn't charity. This was poetry. This was the circle closing. "Simone." "No," he sobbed. "You can't be serious. We are the Jenkins family. We don't take the bus. People will see us." I smiled. "Yes, they will. And they will see that you are finally living within your means." I reached for the window switch. "One more thing, Darnell." He looked up, tears mixing with the sprinkler water on his face. "Make sure you keep the ticket," I said. "Why?" he whispered. "Because," I said, my voice cold as the grave, "it is the only receipt you are ever going to get from me. Frame it. It marks the day you finally paid for something yourself." I pressed the button. The window began to rise. Darnell screamed. "No, Simone. Don't do this, Mom. She is leaving us. She gave me $5. He hammered on the glass. Beatrice came running over, slipping in the mud, screaming curses. Ebony was wailing in the background. I sat back against the leather seat. The window sealed shut, cutting off their screams instantly. The silence returned. The peace returned. "Drive tiny," I said. The Rolls-Royce surged forward. I didn't look back. I didn't check the rearview mirror. I didn't need to see them to know what they looked like. They looked like the past. We turned the corner, leaving the gated community behind. We merged onto the highway, the city lights of Atlanta spreading out before me like a carpet of diamonds. I was not going to the Ritz-Carlton. That was a diversion. We drove to the private airfield on the outskirts of the city. The car pulled right onto the tarmac. Waiting there, gleaming under the floodlights, was a Gulfstream G650. The stairs were down. The engines were already whining, ready for takeoff. I stepped out of the car. The wind was cold, but this time I welcomed it. It felt clean. Standing at the bottom of the stairs was Elena holding Malik. My son was wrapped in a cashmere blanket, sleeping soundly. He didn't know that his father was currently fighting over a bus seat. He didn't know that his grandmother was crying over a fake purse. All he knew was warmth. I took him in my arms. He smelled of milk and innocence. "Is everything ready?" I asked Elena. "The flight plan is filed." Madame Chairman, she said. Exuma is waiting. The villa is prepped. The staff is expecting you. And the phones I asked. Elena held up a bag containing my old SIM card and the burner phone I had used to communicate with Darnell. Destroyed, she said. New numbers have been issued. Only Charles and the legal team have them. Good, I said. I walked up the stairs of the jet. I turned at the top and looked back at the city one last time. Somewhere down there in the grid of lights, a man was standing at a bus stop clutching a $5 bill, realizing that his arrogance had cost him paradise. I stepped inside the cabin. The door closed. The world was locked out. I sat in the wide leather seat and buckled Malik in beside me. The plane began to taxi. I felt the thrust of the engines pushing me back into the seat. We lifted off. The ground fell away. The lawsuits, the drama, the betrayal. It all became small. It became insignificant. I pulled out my tablet. I opened the banking app. Balance $45 million. Status liquid. Future limitless. I looked at the camera breaking the fourth wall, speaking directly to the women who had watched this journey, the women who were still sitting in their own versions of that cold bus stop. They tell you to stay for the sake of the family. They tell you to humble yourself to keep the peace. They tell you that a good woman endures. I looked down at my son, then back at the lens. Don't believe them. Endurance is not a virtue when you are enduring abuse. Silence is not noble when it is bought with your dignity. I thought I was saving my marriage by hiding my power. But you cannot save something that is already rotting. You can only bury it. The plane banked left, heading south toward the ocean. If you are holding a secret weapon, if you are holding on to your own worth while someone treats you like an option, remember this story. Don't wait for them to change. They won't. Don't wait for them to apologize. They can't. Take the keys. Take the power. And if they ask you for a ride after they tried to run you over, I smiled a genuine happy smile. Give them the bus fare and fly away. True power often moves in silence. Darnell's fatal error wasn't just his greed, it was his arrogance in assuming that quiet submission meant weakness. We often stay in toxic dynamics hoping for change. But this story reminds us that you cannot save people who are committed to their own destruction. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to hand them the bill for their behavior and walk away. Your dignity is non-negotiable, and the best revenge is simply living a life they can no longer afford to access. Have you ever had to remind someone of your worth the hard way? Tell me your story in the comments below and subscribe for more tales of justice served cold.